Tonight, I bring on someone that I've been wanting to speak to for quite some time. This gentleman was the star and team leader on the History Channel's amazing show, hit show, Legend of the Superstition Mountains. So tonight we welcome Wayne Tuttle. Wayne, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, man. We had a couple rainy weeks there, and now we got actually 4 or 5 days. We finally started to dry out a little. So
nice,
kind of nice. We got water. It was a soaking rain, which is the best kind. But now we get to dry out again.
Right, and that's always the drag. I love it when it rains. I love it when it's stormy, and I love it when it's windy but cool. Right now, I think we're hovering right around 68 degrees outside here with a nice breeze, and the sky's making a lot of noise, but we have yet to see any rain tonight, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed. So, Wayne, how did you get started in all this? What sparked your interest with this whole legends and lore behind the Superstition Mountains? What got you started?
Well, I think I've told the story before. It was came to Arizona in 68 or 69, and I'm sure I'd been out by the Superstitions, but my first real memory is in 73 or 74, I was taken through a hike through the mountains. And anybody who's got a map in there knows the area. I started out on the northwest end by the first water trailhead, and they took us all the way through down to the Peralta trailhead by Weaver's Needle, and it took all day. And we camped somewhere south of Weaver's Needle, and I was wearing a t-shirt, old pair of khakis, tennis shoes, my Converse All-Stars, and had a sack lunch in my hand because I didn't have to carry much because I was just a kid. But I had an apple, peanut butter jelly sandwich, canteen of Kool-Aid, and some corn chips, and a baseball cap, and that was what I walked through the mountains, and I was just totally, the whole trip, just enthralled. And I remember the trip to this day because I remember my hand was sweaty. Who carries a sack lunch on an all-day hike? And it started wearing out the bag, so the best I could come up with is start eating the food as I was walking because my bag was falling apart. And I ended up eating my lunch as I went through the mountains. And just I was more or less a piece of baggage with legs, more or less. But every fall, every beginning every year during the rainy season, January, February, we'd go out each spring for the summer. And every time I was to tag along, it totally interested me. But that first trip, as I came out, I knew nothing. I heard people talk about stuff, but I couldn't relate it to anything. I knew nothing. I'd never heard of the Lost Dutchman, never heard of none of it. And my birthday was several months later after that trip, and someone got me a copy of the Killer Mountains. And that summer, we ended up making a trip to Gettysburg. And during the plane flight and then the time at Gettysburg as a kid, I read Killer Mountains. And I was just totally, and then I found a book, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, but it was another paperback. And I was reading this stuff going, what is this all about? This place is so cool. And it literally, kind of going through that summer, just kept hooking me. I couldn't wait till the next fall we'd go again. And then by that point, someone else in the family gave me a copy of Barry Storm's Thunder God's Gold that they had laying around. And I sucked that in. And then by Christmas, I got a copy of Sim Zeeley's Lost Dutchman Mine. So I'm this 9, 10-year-old kid. And I was like trying to understand all this because, every one of those books almost tells a different story. But I was totally intrigued. I'd been there. I mean, that's such a cool thing. I'd been there in those mountains. And, also I'm forgetting I made my first trip in the Grand Canyon. My dad couldn't make it. And he had an uncle of mine who was taking his older son, who was probably about 18 or 19. They had me tag along on that trip. So not only did I do the Superstition, I did the Grand Canyon, Gettysburg, read all these books. So that kind of, like, the Superstitions became my thing. Because I was like, well, I hiked the Grand Canyon. I've done all this. I'm 9, 10 years old. I thought, I can do this. And it became, I think, where a lot of people heard about the story, The Lost Dutchman, to me, it became, this is the coolest place I've ever seen. I want to go explore every nook and cranny, every cave, everything out there. And that's what it started for years was I just couldn't wait for those trips. That was my favorite place to go, my favorite place to get turned loose. And today we have a whole different mindset. Almost anybody listening will remember when you got up in the morning, you went camping or you went and did something, your mom said, be back by dinner, we're going to eat at 4. And you just took off and you were gone. And I grew up like that during the summers back east, going in the woods at my grandparents. And when I was out here in the desert, I never thought anything of it. My dad, who'd grown up in West Virginia, didn't think of anything of it. You just run around in the woods. Well, the desert, same thing.
Yeah, those were the days. Those were the days. Turned loose,
and I literally was just running around in the Superstition Mountains with a canteen. And who knows how many times I could have died. But I just somehow came back by dinner time. And by the time I'm 11 or 12, my dad realized, you probably should take the 22 with you. And that was what kept spurring it. And every time we went, and then you get the Boy Scouts and just anything I could do to get another trip in. And then I got that magical thing called a driver's license. And that became the coolest thing in the world because that's the freedom of throw a sleeping bag or something. And we're still talking the 70s and going into the 80s. Even though the Superstitions, there was still until the early 90s a lot of serious bad things happening in there. I didn't know any of that. Now I know about it. But back then, someone would just say, stay out of that part of the mountain. Okay. I heard the dynamite go off. I heard gunshots. I didn't think much of it as a kid. I just thought, I guess maybe I was immune to it. Nobody's going to shoot at me. I'm just a kid running around out here with a 22. So I just continued to go out. So through high school, I'd hang with my friends, do stuff with my friends, but then I might disappear for a weekend or two. And that was just so I could go in the mountains. And I spent that time, believe it or not, I just went in the mountains. If no one else wanted to go, I just went by myself. And I never developed that apprehension, fear. I wasn't really necessarily definitely searching for treasure. It was just, to me, if I read something in a book or a magazine article or a newspaper article, I wanted to go to that place and see where that happened. They found this guy's body laying across the trail here, and they found his head down there. So I had to go to that spot. And I don't know why, but I had to go. And I just kept having to kind of put my feet on the ground to all these things and look around and say, well, I see old mines and stuff, but what does all this mean? So it was just this being in this thing as you continue down the road. And I would say until sometime in the even into the 90s, it was, you had groups of friends that went with you, but then they get married and they have kids and they're like, dude, I can't go. And I just kept going. It was like, okay. And then I would get new friends and I would take them in the mountains. And oddly enough, they would never want to go again because they go, what is wrong with you? I mean, dude, that place is dangerous. We almost died back in there. But I don't know if it's the mountains call to you. I know people have told me it's kind of a romantic notion, but I've always had that draw. The first time I went in, I felt it. It just felt like the right place. And there's very few places you find in the world that you just feel like your feet hit the ground and it just feels right. And I don't feel, it's not that I'm impervious to anything out there. I just feel like it's right. If it was my time to go and I'm out there, that's fine but it just feels like that special place, something about it. And I know it could be any number of places, but it is that place. And it might be the history, it might be the geology, it might be, but it's just everything wrapped into one. And I just kept picking up books and I kept talking to people and I kept looking, and it just kept, you don't realize, and then suddenly you're 40 years old, 30, 40 years old. And then you suddenly realize how much you actually know because you've been at how many campfires. And, the thing you do when you're younger is you keep your mouth shut, because the 70s and even in the early 80s, you keep your mouth shut and you just listen. And then suddenly I realized, wow, I know a lot because people talk in front of you. They drink beer at night. They just talk. And I just knew all these places. People, he's just a kid. Who cares? Oh, I'll tell them. I'll send them that way. And that's what it was. It was just this constant, just evolution build as I went in the mountains. And like I said, it just continued to move forward until around 2000. I suddenly realized, wow, this is, I'd never thought about it, but wow, I've been out there a long time. And I'm meeting these guys I'm thinking are old timers. And they're like, yeah, I've been out in the mountains about 20, 25 years. And I'm thinking, wow, I got something on you, I think. It's like, damn it. And then they're going, oh man, good for you. But then the funny thing was, because I was older at that point and they understood I was knowledgeable, everybody started to just sit down and talk with me and take time with me because I think they realized, hey, he belongs here at the table. And that was very cool for me because a number of people I met on the way was briefly when I was younger, Tom Collenborn, Ron Feldman, Greg Davis. I didn't know them, and they wouldn't remember me. And I remembered them because I was young, and I was a little awestruck because Tom wrote articles in the newspaper and gave lectures, and Greg was part of the Dons of Arizona, and both of them were involved with the original museum. And then Ron Feldman ran the corrals, and we'd go down there, and girls want to ride horses. Okay, we'll go down there, we'll get horses and ride horses. And it was really odd to me that after all those years later, these guys become my friends. I mean, they don't remember me. I remember them, and I don't think they thought much. I'm sure I was just another person passing through. And then years later, I realized, wow, I'm sitting around. These guys are like friends. They've kind of accepted me in, not realizing. And I wouldn't expect them to remember me because I was probably just this quiet kid who probably had some really dumb questions at one time. And they probably figured I was coyote bait when I went in the mountains. And somehow I made it through. So that's kind of how I got to where, at around 2014 or so, where everything, definitely changed on that point because I don't think anyone, even the people in forums, some people knew me by a couple different names, but nobody knew me by my actual own name. Very few people knew me because I just literally was under the radar. I was a solo guy. And I didn't attach myself to anybody. I'd hike with anybody or do, but I really didn't have any affiliation with anybody. I just got along with everyone, and I'd sit in, I'd stop by, talk to people and stuff and ask questions, but I did not have an affiliation with anyone. And a strange thing recently on a project we've been working on, I realized I never really had a mentor. I went through all that time without that person trying to guide me. I mean, everybody had a mentor or some people that helped them along it early on. I never had that. I made it through my teens, my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, and I never had someone that gave me any direction in there. I just had wild abandon, pick up every book and run around every direction and do which probably benefited me in the end because I picked up so much more knowledge by no one telling me anything. I was totally unfiltered. Just everything I heard and everything I learned, I sucked in, and I worked out my own truth from that. So that's kind of how I got there, and then kind of just, like I said, it just kept going. And I lost a lot of friendships because of the mountains, because after a trip or two, a lot of people were like, they didn't want to hang because they just didn't understand my draw to the mountains. They, oh yeah, it's not such a big deal. You think you're such a badass. And then they go out with you one time and they're like, you're crazy, man. We almost died in there. What are you doing back in there? What's wrong with you?
Yeah, but they don't view the mountains the way you view the mountains. You grew up in the mountains, so
I didn't understand that.
Right.
And it took a long time. You need to get to a certain point and reflect back and understand, kind of like, and I know for a lot of people, I know there's a lot of people like going out in the woods and going out in the desert and doing stuff by themselves. When you're that kind of person, it's hard to relate to people. And I got very lucky early on in the 2000s to meet Randy Wright because for a good 15 years or so, I ended up with a partner that we talked, we hung out a lot, but there was times we walked in the mountains and spent entire days in the mountains. We never spoke much more than probably 10 words to each other. But he was the perfect person. We never had an argument. We just listened to each other. We talked and stuff. He kind of probably learned a lot of stuff from me as I went through the mountains because I'd had such a long history. But I didn't feel like a teacher to him. I felt like just we were friends. And he was probably the first person I ever had that friendship that for a long period of time and term, we just went in the mountains all the time together. And he was probably that 1 in a million person that was going to be perfect because most people and Randy got me to hike with other people too, which was very, very important because I would tell Randy, you're crazy. Why are you going with that guy? That guy, he looks like he's half his hinges are missing. I didn't trust people because I came out of the 70s and 80s. And my thing as a young boy, I still had that thing kind of like you see someone else coming down the trail You either keep your head down and just pass them by and really don't acknowledge them, or, if you see them playing ahead of time, you just duck off, sit behind a boulder till they go by, and then you just get back out. I was better at avoiding people than making friends and going out hiking with people.
Well,
that wasn't really my thing.
Yeah, that explains why you just would go out a lot of times by yourself, because you would get more out of it just soaking everything in and not having to worry about somebody else potentially getting hurt or somebody else not enjoying themselves. You went out there, and I mean, that was those mountains are your spot. That's your heaven, so to speak,
Well, I think in hindsight too, I mean, there was the trust factors and other things.
Sure.
I think I just liked spending time alone.
Right.
Because life is busy, and I worked, and you got school, and you got your friends, and the drama that comes with growing up as a teenager and stuff. And I saw that as a place to this day where the clock stopped.
Right.
And it was my place to get away when everything got too much, or no matter what was happening in my life, or regardless of whether I was doing bad things to myself or making bad decisions. That was kind of like time out. And I was able to kind of not escape, but just stop for a moment, get out, and kind of reset myself a bit, and then come back. And life is not easy. I mean, it's got its difficulties, and I didn't run away, but it was an unusual thing to just go off by myself, and I wasn't depressed. It wasn't a place I ran to because I was depressed or, I couldn't take life anymore. It was just, I would go out there, and then I would just feel like when I came back, okay, I'm ready again, and that's a hard thing when a lot of people don't like being alone. And I never had a problem out camping alone, staying the night alone. I mean, I didn't care if I scared myself so silly that, I was looking over my back for the next day, or I sat up all night. I just didn't seem to care. For some reason, it didn't deter me, which is odd because most of us kind of don't like that. I always say things about people. One of the human things that we have about all of us is that fear of the dark. You put someone out in the middle of nowhere with no one around, no fire, in the dark, every noise is amplified 1,000 times. But it shows you just feel like I got to survive till the sun comes up. And there was more than a few times it just got to me, and I sat there, my back up against a rock, waiting for the sun to come up, trying to keep myself from driving myself crazy. But it somehow that just fueled me more. I felt like I made it through this. I somehow, and then you learn another thing I learned is, and it's something I don't have against people, but someone won't understand is like, I'm not a hiker because I don't think the mountain cares if you make it to the highest peak. I don't think the mountain cares if you made it 20 miles in this one single day. You're not defeating the mountain. The mountain's still there, and if it has a personality, it's laughing at you because you didn't do anything to it. You couldn't move it or do anything. So I never had that challenge like the mountain was challenging me. I always just felt, and I'm not going to say at home, but I always felt like I belonged there in a certain way, and I wouldn't want to necessarily live there, but I was welcomed enough to kind of spend my time there, kind of as a guest, I guess. And it was different. And I know there's people that probably can feel the same way with different places. There's some people in the mountains, but the mountains were never romantic to me. They never kind of drew me in certain ways. And then the treasure hunting and stuff just came as I found things, and you would locate things or find a lot of things to be true. It kind of opened up this other side of me going, oh, there's something to this, which is always that to me was the thing of like, didn't expect to see that, and that probably fueled the treasure hunting side as I got older.
Right.
But again, it also came from writing stuff down. I didn't keep great journals, but I always tried to keep notes of certain trips and stories, which I try to relate today out of memory, which is tough. But I just kept going through it, and then I just started adding things up. And then, of course, like I said, when I met and started to hike and spend time in the mountains with Randy Wright, I had a sounding board. And I finally had someone that would ask me questions back that I hadn't asked myself about things. And I started recognizing, yeah, that's true. I never thought about it that way. And that was one of the cool things. I finally had someone that had a difference of opinion that I'd listen to, but he was always trying to kind of figure out, well, why wouldn't you check on that? Follow that up. And I'd look at him like, what do you mean? And then he'd point out the obvious thing. that I just didn't because I couldn't get there. I was just me. So, but that's kind of it in a nutshell, and kind of a bit of long form without us going year by year, which I almost can't. But it was a lot of time. I mean, it's hard to look at it, and now it feels like it's been a long time. But I'm coming up on almost, getting close to 50 years since I first went through the mountains. Not since I saw them. Who knows what that was. But since I started hiking and going back in the mountains with groups. And that kind of blows me away because I don't feel that old still. It just feels, in reflection, hindsight now, I can sit back and say, it just seems like it wasn't that long ago. And yet it's closing in on 50 years. And I'm like, dang, where did all that time, especially that young skinny guy that could cut through a knife through butter in the mountains, where'd that kid go? Because I'd like to have him back.
Well, I mean, speaking of time, how far back does the lore of the Superstition Mountains go? I mean, taking us even way back before the Dutchman, what's kind of the history of the general area that we know that is, whether it be written down or passed down through, generations in time? How far back do we know the history?
Well, the history we know, where it really kind of starts, is December 25th, 1890. And that's the time, and Jim Bark, who owned the Quarter Circle Ranch, the Quarter Circle U Ranch, wrote a manuscript that never was published called the Bark Notes. And basically what happens is this woman, Julia Thomas, who was friends with a gentleman named Jacob Waltz. And then she had a younger man. Well, I think he was a little younger than Julia, worked for her, named Reinhard Petrasch. Reinhard's family had come from Germany, spoke fluent German, and Julia was called, I think it's called like an Octoroon or something. So she was mixed race, and she had learned German. So Waltz, who predominantly obviously spoke German, being from Germany, found them. She ran a bakery, like confectionery store in Phoenix, and he kind of had spent time with them. And December 25th, which is Christmas Day, but was also Julia Thomas's birthday. And they went out to Waltz's farm, which was located, I believe it's like 12th Street, 7th Street, 10th Street, and Buckeye Road, which was Henshaw back then. And they went to spend the day with him. And he's sitting there on the porch with them, and they're eating the picnic, and he pointed east to the Superstitions, and he said, my mine and all my ore and everything came from a mine in those Superstition Mountains. And that's where it begins. And he talks to them about it, and he says he got a lot older than he thought. He needed to replenish his funds because he didn't expect to live as long as he did. And because of all this, he says, we need to make a trip back. He says, we don't need to work the mine. Let's just go back in. We'll get a horse and a buggy. We'll take the horses. Julia and I will ride the horses. Reinhardt can carry most of the stuff on his back for us. And we'll go in, and I got a camp where my old camp was, and we'll go in, and I have a cache of ore. And there's more than enough for the three of us for the rest of our lives. And he said, I'll show you where the mine's at, kind of tell you where it is when we get there. But we just got to go find the camp. We'll take that ore. We'll come back, and we'll settle up there. And, thank you very much for being my friends. And a month later, they're starting the preparation for the trip, and because they were probably going to be going in probably March, sometime in March after the winter, after when things started to cut out, the winter would break. And there was a huge rainstorm, and the Salt River flooded, and it took out Waltz's home, and he ended up with pneumonia. And Reinhard Petrasch went out and was able to bring him back into Julia's, but Waltz never recovers, and 7-8 months later, he dies. And the whole time he's trying to tell him where it's at, but he can never get healthy enough to take him out and point him a direction. And that's the beginning of it, that period of time of their friendship, and then him telling them, look, you guys help me out. You're not miners, but we'll go retrieve this stuff. I'll show you where the mine's at, but it's really a difficult place. We have no business working on it. I'm an old man. You're a woman. He's a young kid. There's no reason for us to do this. So and that was the failing. The flood pretty much messed everything up for them. And then when Waltz died, we have the joke of he basically had so much time to tell them where the mine is. I think it confused things because they would say he would start and talk to them and tell them how to go, and then he would stop, and then another day he would tell them, you know what? Okay, do this. And I think what happened is when you have 8 months of someone telling you stories about it, is by the time he died, they were trying to figure out what he meant from all these stories. And you have to remember, they're speaking in German, so they're translating this back into English for themselves. And I think that, combined with everything else and having way too much information for two people that never had been out in the mountains like that and all, it was just way overwhelming. And then when they went out, they had to go by anything in particular they could say, well, maybe this means it. And then they started having like Reinhardt's father and brother, Gottfried and Herman, come in. And I'm sure they start telling them, you don't know what he meant. And then it starts diffusing itself. It starts kind of breaking down because other people are trying to tell them this is what he probably meant. And then it just keeps watering down the clues and breaking them up. So you find out less and less. So as time goes by, everybody has less and less information each person brought in. And I think that's what happened. I think if there would have been one person that actually, or Waltz might have died earlier, or he could have rode out in a wagon close enough to give them a good general idea of direction, I think it might have been much easier. But we're talking about a campsite that he'd covered up and kind of cleared out, and we're talking about a mine that he said he covered. So that's kind of like, and now we're looking for something that has been, he didn't obviously, because he was pretty ill in the 1880s. So his probably last trip was 1878, 79, maybe 1880. So when you start putting all those factors, it's been 140 years since Jacob Waltz was there at that mine. So it's going to be something that it was difficult for them from the beginning, but by the time that the 30s, 40s, 50s came, it was getting near impossible. That how would you pick that out from anything else?
Yeah, it seems that the whole thing just got so convoluted with, well, I think he meant this. Well, I don't think so. I think he meant this. And so it got so turned around. And like you said, he had time to take them out and give them a rough idea, and it just didn't happen. So, the exact location has kind of been lost to time. And so I know that there have been people that have reportedly found it, and there have been people that have disappeared in the mountains looking for it. I know there's quite a few people that have disappeared in the mountains. Have there been do you know of anybody that has shown any type of proof that they've actually come close to finding it or have found it?
No, I'm going to say there's some people there's people that honestly think they did. You got to remember the Superstition Mountains, Goldfield Ghost Town, right beside that is the Mammoth Mine, which was a high gold producing mine. Near it was the Bulldog and the Black Queen Mine. Across the street, the Wasp. All those mines were producing gold mines. And then on the southeastern edge of Superstitions, there's a lot of silver mines that do produce gold. And we have to also remember this is a volcano. So it's a collapsed caldera. There's 3 of them. Some people say as many as 5, but there's 3 known collapsed calderas. So there were 3 volcanoes that collapsed on themselves in there. That's what makes it look like what it does. And it changed the way the mineralization's at in the mountains. So the further you get outside the mountains, the more gold you find. So I think some people find gold and they want to associate with it because you don't have much to base it on. So they'll take here's 100 clues, and I'll take the ones that fit this spot best, and I found some gold, so that's Jacob Waltz's mine. And I think that's happened in a number of instances, and that's fine. And I think those guys, I think they'll accept that to some degree for their own benefit. They'll believe in it themselves, and they don't care if other people. Let's face it, if you found something that rich, do you really care if anybody believes you? I wouldn't. I mean, I don't need movies or TV rights to it anymore. I'm just going to live, my days nice and comfortable. But I think most people can't give you anything. I've had hundreds of people tell me they found it. They send me Google Earth pictures. They tell me they found it with the Peralta stone maps. but they never come up with proof of anything. I would say 50% of them always want me to kind of fund them $5,000, $10,000 to help them on their trip, which I'm thinking, if you found it, why do you need money from me? One, I'm kind of logical like that. And two, why are why are you just sharing all this information for me? And why should I trust you to kind of take me to it? Because what's going to stop it? If it's worth 100 million, 200 million, and you don't know the area, you don't know where we're going in the middle of nowhere, why are you suddenly trusting me? Because that seems like a goofy thing for me to do, I wouldn't want to trust somebody. So you get all these people all wound up and they think they've got it. I've had people tell me it's this tunnel here, it's this tunnel. They found mines that I've seen 100 times that aren't it. And there's no taking them off that. Once they think they've done it, they've done it. Hey, you know what? You don't know what you're talking about. All your years, it doesn't matter if you've been there 52 times and you had it assayed and there's nothing in it. This was it. I think for some people, they like closure. Some people can't live with the fact that there's no closure. And I think other people, I know some people believe it was the bulldog, which is played out, was similar. I mean, if you wanted to direct someone from Waltz's house to the bulldog, you could have drawn it on a piece of paper and there was no reason to confuse anybody, because it would have been very, very simple to go from his place to the bulldog. It would have been a very easy map and a very easy trip.
So played out means that there's no more valuable gold or anything gold, coming out of the mine.
Yeah, if there was gold, it was far deeper still. And I think something happened to the mine, and now it's a gravel pit. So once they got in there, instead of the gravel pit, some other things happened. The old mine collapsed. The Mammoth has a similar problem. There's probably still gold in there deep down, but the mine's kind of become unstable and kind of collapsed on itself, and the water's crept in from the water table below it. Obviously, we're in a drought, but still, unfortunately, a lot of those deep old mines, the water tables come up through them. It's found its way into them. And because it's gotten the soil, it's started them to collapse. They can't even do pit mining on it because they just keep collapsing the whole thing into itself. So, there's people that believe some played out mines might have been it. And I'm not going to disagree with them. I just don't think anyone's ever come up with solid proof that fit the basic early clues. And that's the ones I'm going to go through. I'm just going to stick to those, because why would Jacob Waltz lie? Why would they, when they tried to get Jim Bark to help them because they were frustrated, said, we can't figure it out. Here's what Waltz told us. He checked both stories. Both people told him the same exact stories. They gave him the same exact clues when he interviewed them separately. So he believed them entirely. And him and Sim Ely basically spent 30 years searching for the mine based on that stuff. So I would tend to say it would fit with what they said. And the difficulty is no one's ever been able to just take that basic set and make it fit perfect. And I mean, it could be anywhere in there. And if you've ever taken a trip in the Superstition Mountains, you ever go into the inner of the mountains, it's a place that's full of just bizarre conundrums. I mean, it makes no sense. It's full of quartz. There's not really much granite showing. Geologically, the gold would be pretty deep in it, but then it's because it's a collapsed caldera. There's been stuff pushed up in weird places through the mountains. It's full of caves and lava tubes and all kinds of strange things. It has its own unique strangeness to it. So geologically, you could say it's not going to be in the Western superstitions because it's not conducive to gold, but because of the volcanic action, Waltz's statement was no miner will ever find his mine. There's no tailings. They would never look in that area ever for a mine, and no cowboy would find it. He said it literally was not the place you'd expect. If he hadn't been told where it was by the Peraltas, he would have never found it himself. So that tells you you're not looking in the place where you would expect to find it by anything from the surface or even by mineralization or anything you could see or any way you could test it. He basically said it would have gone undiscovered except I knew where it was.
Well, and
a lot of times people find these mines that they're claiming, well, this must have been it. Well, it's in an area that geologically just jumps out at you and says, yeah, there's gold in the area. You can just go to the nearest wash and find some gold.
So it doesn't fit. Somebody showed him where the mine was?
Waltz's story that he told Julia and Reinhardt was he and a partner were traveling through. Waltz lived in Prescott for years. He had a couple mines he got kind of screwed out of up that way. Got his legs pulled off of underneath him. They were traveling through, and they've been prospecting. They ran into a guy named Peralta. And there's a story that they saved his life and this and that. But the main gist of the story is they meet Peralta, and Peralta basically says, "Are you American?" "No, but are you American citizens?" They're like, "Yeah." Waltz was a naturalized American citizen in the county of Los Angeles when he came to California during the gold rush, and his papers are on file. Well, Peralta lived in Mexico, so he thought Waltz and his partner would be the perfect guys, because if someone messed with them, they'd have American citizens with them, not only to protect them because they'd had to fight the Indians and everything all the way through, but these guys would be able to say, "Hey, we're American citizens. These guys, are with us," and all that. So Peralta felt confident going with them, made a deal with them. He took them to where the mine was. They mined that. When they were done, he made a deal, said, "Look, if you want, I'll give you your papers for temporary ownership of the mine, and you can have those papers, and you can work the mine, and legally it'll be basically yours, but it's not going to be anywhere on file, but you'll have paperwork in your pocket, and nobody knows where it's at. Nobody's left of my family that's going to bother you, and so I'll stake you supplies and stuff, and you guys can go back and take what you want, and I'll just take your shares now." And that seemed like a great deal because they saw how much gold was there. So they went back to work it, and during this period, Waltz's partner ended up staying behind because supposedly one of their mules or burros kicked over a bunch of the supplies, and they were going to end up short on supplies. So Waltz was supposed to go in and get some more supplies while they finished up. And while he was gone, when he came back, his partner was dead. And Waltz covered everything up, made one trip after that into the mountains to basically kind of cover things up and grab some of the ore that was there, and he left again. And that was Waltz's story. So he got it because someone else knew where it was. And the Peralta story kind of holds up a bit. I know there's a lot of people have their issues with it, but a gentleman by the name of Frank Fish. And Frank Fish was a treasure hunter. He died many, many years ago. But Frank Fish basically heard about the Adolf Ruth story, which comes much later. When he heard about it, that had to do with the Gonzalez family and their maps. And they had maps that supposedly belonged to the Peralta family. And when he heard they belonged to the Peralta family, Frank Fish went down and started going through all these Peralta families back in probably the 40s, 30s or 40s, early on. And he came across a family that said, "Hey, we had some mines. We got some maps, but there was 2 maps. We don't know where the other map is. Someone else in the family has it, but here's one of the maps." And that's what's called, we use that in our TV show, it's the Frank Fish map, I refer to it. And he said he never could figure it out because you needed both maps. But that was another tie to the Peralta family. There was also a gentleman that came out, one of the Peraltas, that came into the Superstitions, and it's on record where he said he kind of went through the mountains and said every area they had worked was torn up, didn't look the same anymore. He said it was a waste of time to go back in there because they'd never be able to reopen the mines. And yet there was another gentleman, and I'm trying to get his name. It was Peralta, Cristobal Peralta. And he supposedly came from Spain or Mexico or somewhere, didn't speak English, had a translator. And there was a thing called the Salazar survey that came from him. And it was supposed to be, like a survey of how to find their mines. Now, we're not saying it's the lost Dutchman mine, but he said they had mines. And the survey had some tintypes with it. And the individual man whose name was Salazar didn't get the tintypes, but he kind of remembered some of the survey stuff. And those stories all have to do with the Peraltas. And there was a lot of those kind of trickled in. Some of the family knew. And you got to imagine if there had been a massacre and all this bad luck associated, after a generation or two, it would have passed. But the one map we do have, of any map, and we used it on the TV show, was the Frank Fish map. It's the only authentic, still original map that exists. And I've wanted it tested for years. We've had a lot of problems with that when I did the TV show Unexplained, Unexplored. I got permission that we could have it tested, and they still didn't. I was really frustrated with that because it is on like some type of animal skin. It was kind of ruined by some chemicals, but I just wanted to see what kind of earliest date we could pull off of it. Because again, it's possibly the only authentic original map left. And all the others are copies or what we think were the maps or what we think were, someone, even Adolf Ruth's profile map, the lineage of it is not that clear if that's really the map he had. The Frank Fish map might be one of the maps that Adolf Ruth actually had. So, but all these maps, and when we have something authentic that actually seems to date back to the time period, comes back to this family of Peraltas. And we've tried, but, now that you're dealing with not just 140 years of Walt, but you're dealing with, 130 years since Walt died. But if the Peraltas were back in there in the 40s or 1840s or 50s or 60s, you're dealing with such a long period of time and so many generations. It's just going to be, there's going to be likely nobody in the family that has any clue about this. If any knowledge they have is probably from a book I've read, and they're not going to have any original source. So that becomes that frustrating part that we have some stories, we have some, but it seems to tie into Walt's story. And that's what I always look for, is when you have a story, you're looking at it as, okay, what holds weight with this story? And when it doesn't hold weight, I always said, well, then I'm just going to dismiss it. Doesn't matter if everybody else bases it on one of the best clues ever. I'm going to drop it because I just don't feel it sustains the story at all. I can't go with a possibility or probability until I get it to be a documented or fact. So I tended to go with the best firsthand information I got, the best resources I got, and that's what I hunted off of. And to this day, I still go off of. When I realize, okay, this appears, everything I can point to says this is authentic, I'll work with it. If I have suspicions or problems with something, I will put it on I will not completely dismiss it maybe, but I'll put it off to the side till I can get more relevant or better information. And that made it different for me, but that also kind of led me through to realize the folklore and the mythology that was built on Walt. Once you strip it all down, he's just an elderly prospector who ended up living too long, trying to get some friends to help him. He lived in Phoenix at a time where there was nothing really luxurious. He had one of the nicer adobe houses. He had locks on his doors and windows, which was kind of unique to the time period. He had some nice outbuildings and some animals. He sold eggs and stuff, but he was living good. But he didn't have to live rich or wealthy because he's this elderly bachelor, and there's not even electricity really in town. There might have been gas closer in town, but he owned property. He lived there. He's elderly. He needed people more to take care of him than anything else and not take advantage of him. So when you look at him, he could have been worth millions, but just no one would suspect it because I don't think he had any reason to do anything with it. And I think that's hard people to wrap around, but I've known people like that. There's been many people. Well, a famous Dutch hunter by the name of Robert Garman died, and it turned out there was quite a bit of cash associated with him, and nobody would have ever expected it. And that happens with a lot of people who are millionaires or multimillionaires because they live literally, hand to mouth, and they don't really ever buy anything fancy in any way, and people just never expect that person had money. But they just don't, maybe the way they were brought up or whatever, they just never assume or seem to have the need to show it. And I think Waltz was one of those people. I think there was nothing to spend it on, and the one thing he seemed to like was sweets and stuff like that. So he befriended Julia Thomas, and he went down to her bakery and he loaned her some money. Well, I don't think he loaned. I think he just gifted her money to help her with her business when her husband left her. And they spoke German, and I think, and the reference to him is that she just referred to him as Grandpa. She really cared about him, thought the world of him, thought he was, and he kind of took to her and Reinhardt because they spoke German, and maybe Reinhardt reminded him of when he was a young boy, and the closest thing he had to family, and I think that's how the story spins out. So it's about this lonely old man that didn't have a lot. He outlived his friends, didn't have anything to really spend his money on, and obviously when she needed help, he was more than happy to come in and help her out financially. And then he said, hey, you guys can return the favor because I'll make us all rich. And we'll get this, and you guys can help take care of me. I'll stay with you. You take care of me. It's no big deal, and then I'll set you up so everything's good. And the funny thing is Julia had a successful business, and she also had a boarding house she was running. So Julia wasn't in poverty. She wasn't like this impoverished woman or nothing. So it would have helped her a lot. It was probably something to help her out after her divorce and stuff. But It's odd. None of them seemed to be, but there was nothing to spend the money on. There was no cars. There was, like I said, electricity probably was coming through Phoenix probably around that time, but who knows who had it. There would have been gas, but there wasn't. Phoenix at that period of time, 1880s, 1890s, was a very small town, and there just wasn't anything that luxurious. I think even still the train at that point was just probably coming through. So when people look at Jacob Waltz, they like the murderous, the guy who's the drunk. He murders people. He's burying people in the mountains. He's secretive. He's this nasty guy. I don't think that there's nothing that reflects that. Everything we have is he files with the sheriff of guys trying to jump his property. He needs somebody to protect him and watch out for him. There was a murder on his property, two guys arguing and working out by his property. And they basically, in the article, which is probably about 1883, 1884, refers to Waltz as he really couldn't see that well, and he was kind of deaf, and he wasn't a very good witness. And they didn't imply it. He had anything to do with it. He just was a terrible witness because he was running around trying to figure out what he heard and where it came from, and he couldn't figure it out, and this guy ended up getting killed. And the other guy, I guess, admitted to it. So Waltz was nowhere considered in anything to do with the whole thing. But again, it's the Waltz that you find in documents that are actually filed, paperwork we actually have, it just seems to be this nice old gentleman that kind of kept to himself on the outskirts of town, outlived everyone he knew, befriended some people, and then just tried to help them along, and then passes away before it all comes to fruition. And these two people end up with the frustration that they can never resolve the treasure hunt that he thought he was sending them out on. So that's kind of the early part in a nutshell. And I'm hoping everybody followed that because it is a hell of a story to tell.
Well, when he passed away, was there any proof that he had any type of wealth that would be associated with pulling gold out of the mine? I mean, did he leave anybody anything or?
Well, first thing is when Julia Thomas's husband left her, she had a bunch of bills. There was a soda fountain coming in, and she got just waylaid. Waltz, what she said was Waltz came in and found her, and she was crying, and she had all her receipts and bills, and she was like, "I can't do this. I'm going to." And he told her, "Don't worry, just get all the receipts and bills together. We'll go through again." Trash went out, and they paid all her bills off, and there is, you can see when things hit her hard, and her business was going under. It's in the county books where she left Reinhardt Petrash with a lot of the stuff to kind of keep them from foreclosing and taking things from her. But she came out of that hole, and there's no reason why she would have made that up, is that he paid everything off. And the soda fountain was, I can't remember, there's an ad for it. You can see it in an old picture in her bakery. But it all appears to be a true story. The documentation holds it up. Well, it's not only that, because he paid those debts off, but when he died, there was, some people say it's a candle box, some people say different things, but there was something at his house, and he had Petrash bring it in, and there was ore and stuff, and he had them clean it up and keep it under his bed. And that's what they say the matchbox and the cufflinks and some of the jewelry items later, and there was some ore. But that was the ore that was under his bed. That was probably worth a pretty good tidy sum. But that's just what he had left. That was the main thing that he had left, and that's why he wanted to go back in the mountains, because he was on the last of his, what you would say, his savings account, which was buried underneath his house.
Right, and he wanted to go back and get some more and kind of replenish his wealth, so to speak. Well, and
yeah, he said the mine had plenty, but he said they had dug out enough that they didn't have to go to the mine. They would be fine just digging up what they already had out.
I see.
And part of that you can hold up to the story is Waltz becomes very ill early in the 1880s. And he ends up deeding his property and stuff over to the Starr brothers to help take care of him, which the only take care of him they ever did was they just took his property when he basically, in the end, they took his property from him because he had deeded it over to him. I don't think they ever did anything to help him or assist him in any way. I think he recovered and then forgot about the agreement, and one of the brothers died, and the other one just ended up selling Waltz's property off later. But I think Waltz became quite ill, and once he probably got over that illness, he just wasn't the same guy to go back in the mountains. And right. I'm sure he figured, how many years do I got left? Okay, well, I got this much. And he had the geese, and he sold eggs, and, I mean, how much did he need? He's just looking for 3 square meals a day, he's probably living pretty good as far as he was concerned when you consider he was a prospector on the move, probably living in tents and huts and things for most of his life. He probably felt like he probably was living pretty good at that point. And then he just runs into the point. He helps Julia out, and he realizes, well, that's more than I was going to spend in the next 4 or 5 years. Well, guys, we need to go get some more because we kind of took out my savings here. And whatever he had left, which you can hear different numbers, but whatever he had left, now there's kind of different things. A gentleman by the name of Dick Holmes somehow acquired it. And that's all I really want to say on that, because there's supposedly gifts this to Dick Holmes. That's hard to really say why the people that have been there took care of him, helped him, everything they did. And you have to understand, when Waltz dies, he's buried next to Reinhard Petrash's brother, George. They buried him. They took care of him to the very end. And they never seemed to change their loyalty to it. I never heard anything or any story from a number of people, from Herman or Bob Garman or anybody, that Julia or Reinhardt were bent out of shape over all this. That Dick Holmes ended up with. All I heard is two things that make me wonder how Dick Holmes acquired the ore and why he made the story he did that he had it. Now, he might have been a middleman on helping Julia with it. Who knows? But Reinhard Petrash in Barry Storm's Thunder Gods Gold, if you ever get a first edition, there's a thing called the Notes of Authenticity Barry Storm had in the back. And he did know Reinhard Petrash, and he interviewed him. In it, Reinhard says, if Dick Holmes ever met Jacob Waltz, it was in the afterlife. And then he laughs. And it says, then Reinhard laughed. So it says that Reinhard didn't even take it serious. He wasn't angry about it. His attitude was, whatever Dick Holmes is telling you the story of how he acquired all this, that's not true. He never met Waltz. And in fact, another problem the Holmes guys have is, years later, Brownie Holmes, who I think Brownie Holmes was a wonderful human being, and everything I've heard, he was a great guy. But Brownie Holmes' problem is he wasn't his dad, and his dad had told him where Waltz was buried, and he'd been there, and he'd done this and done that. Well, it turns out that's not where Waltz was buried. It was nowhere near where Waltz was buried, which he was buried where Herman said. My brother Reinhardt said they buried him next to my brother George Petrash, and they found the records, and that was true. So I never hold it against Brownie Holmes, because that's what his dad told him. He believed his dad. Everybody would believe their dad if they told them. But there's nothing that ties the Holmes stories or how he received the ore. So he had ore. It was assayed. It was sent off. The jewelry was made out of it and so forth. And some of that's, people, the matchboxes, it's a very small matchbox, but that's usually the ore we test is from that. Now, included from that is there was what was known as the Cochera ore. A gentleman by the name of John Cochera found some rotted saddlebags of ore up in near, I'm going to say Peters Mesa. It's not really on Peters Mesa, but it was near that area. And when he was out searching for something completely different, he stumbled across that ore. And I don't know, I've heard different numbers on it. Ron Feldman's a good source of what John might have got out of it or how much it was all worth. But that ore basically looks the same and kind of comes up as the same type as the Dutchman. Now, there's stuff called the camp ore that kind of seemed to be the same. And then there was the massacre ore, and I don't know how much of that has been found or tested that was from the massacre grounds. But all those ores seem to be from the similar thing. They don't seem to be from the mammoth, the bulldog, or the queen, the black queen, which is odd because they're nearby, but they're outside the superstitions. And then Thomas Glover went and checked and wanted to see if they had anything to do with the ores from the Bradshaws, from the Vulture mine, and it didn't matter. It was from, now, we don't have every mine that was ever done, just known mines that we have assay work from, but he couldn't pin that ore to any mine. It was different in its matrix.
So it's possible.
They're all very similar from a similar event. They all seem to come not from the same exact source, but the same origination source, which means like they're from probably the same general area within a couple miles of each other, but they don't seem to attach to any of the gold mines in the area that are known.
So it's very possible that they could be from the same mine, or you're saying the same general area. So it could be the same mine, or it could be mines in the general area. So all of this different ore that's just been, was all of it just kind of, you mentioned some rotted saddlebags, but the other ore and stuff, was it all just kind of found laying out in the open, or were they actually, I mean, they were obviously out looking for something, but did they just come across it in like a little cave or something?
No, a lot of times you find it in the open. The story I'll tell, I was out glassing, which means I was using binoculars for the people that don't know, for deer up on Bluff Springs Mountain. And I've been hiking across, and I had a couple books with me, and I'm reading books, and I'm just sitting there and waiting for certain times of the day and glassing. And it's mule deer country up in there. And I was sitting there smoking a cigarette, and I looked down, and there's these pieces of quartz. And they just caught my eye because they seemed completely out of place with everything on the ground. It was like cobbed ore where someone had been breaking it down and stuff. And it had some gold in it, and a little bits of gold. And it looked like it'd come out of like some pile or something. And I started walking around, and I found 3 or 4 pieces of this stuff, and I still have it to this day. It was just laying there, like on the top, and you could tell it had been broken off from somewhere. But there was no mine anywhere around. I was on the southern end of Bluff Springs towards what's called the Ely Anderson Trail, which was an old back trail from the mid 1800s. And I'm sitting there just going, this had to have fallen off of something, and it had to have been just laying here. And I just happened to sit on this rock, smoke a cigarette, and just happened to raise my head up and start looking around at the ground because I'm by myself, which is one of the great things about being by yourself, because you tend to look around a lot closer at things than you would if there are other people talking to you. And I picked this stuff up and was just like amazed at it. That doesn't mean I was close to the mine. Who knows what? But there was a mine somewhere up in that area, somewhere that someone had enough ore that they packed on something, and something happened and that ore fell off. And this is what was remaining of it. And it's some chunks, like it's a handful, probably a little more than one handful, of bunch of chunks of ore. And it's rich in iron and stuff and quartz, and it has some gold running through it. Do I think it's Dutchman? I couldn't say one thing or the other. I've never even imagined it. I just know it comes from a gold producing mine somewhere in the Western Superstitions where there shouldn't be anything like that, especially that rich ore coming out of it.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing that you're just sitting there and you come across it. I mean, you know, how often does that happen?
That happens more frequently than when you're specifically looking for something, because there's a tendency, and one of the things a lot of people would be well to do is, I've always trained myself, if you're a hunter, you train yourself to get your brain to look for something that is odd movement. And hunters will tell you they're looking through the brush and trees, and they'll catch an ear twitching in the brush. And nobody would normally see it, but their brain makes their head turn back, and then they're trying to figure out what their brain's trying to tell them, because your brain sees a lot more than you think you see. It's taking everything, processing everything in it. And I always did that always tried to convince myself, let my subconscious just tell me when to turn my head back. And anytime my head keeps going over an area, I keep looking, because I'm thinking there's something that's making me want to look back. And we all do it. We do it naturally, where we kind of take a second look. And that second look of like, what is it that, and then most of the time we're like, we don't understand. But there's something our brain was triggering, is like, hey, and it nudged us. And it's not being psychic. It's just being able to tune in and listen to your brain tell you. And that is what I think happened up there, is I just had nothing. There was no music, nobody talking, there's nobody with me. So I'm looking across, and I probably just kept my head kept bringing me back, looking at the ground there, till I caught those pieces of rock, which were smaller than a cigarette pack.
Right.
And I wouldn't have caught them 10, 15 feet away, except I kept looking. I didn't have nothing else to do. So I was just looking at the ground, and I kept coming back over that area till boom, but I found that works. I'm really great at finding arrowheads and pottery shards now, because I know when my head kind of clicks, I keep coming back to wherever, my brain, my eyes kind of stopped or did a flicker, and usually I'll find one, which is just my brain telling me, we saw it, dummy, get back to there. And it's hard, our brain's a supercomputer. We always, even the dumbest of us, like myself, our brain is capable of so much more than we think it is. Our brain can make us hear things that aren't there. It can make us see things that aren't there. And it's certainly taking in a lot more information than we know, which is, I don't know, did you ever have one of those children's monitors next to your bed?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I was born in the early '70s, so I don't even know if those were even around back then.
Well, no, I'm talking as a parent. And
oh,
myself,
yes, for
I
my
had them,
yes,
and they basically, I don't know if they've gotten better, but it always had a ton of white noise in it,
right.
and your brain will figure things out through white noise.
Yes,
if you
it
lay
will.
there, you'll think you're hearing music, and you'll get up and check the kid's room because you're hearing music. But there is no music there. It's your brain trying to figure out in that weird mess of trying to put something together on its own. And people always like to equate it with something else, but they don't realize how powerful your mind is. And there's a thing called Satori in Zen in Buddhism. And Satori is where you basically get yourself to the point where you can hear voices, and they're not demons, they're not entities, they're nothing. It's literally your brain's resistance to when you're breaking down your ego and yourself. Your brain will fight back. And your subconscious, which we all know, your subconscious is the craziest thing because whenever it puts a dream together, it puts the dumbest things together, right? It dresses you funny. It puts the wrong people in, and you're at your parents' house, but that wasn't my parents' house. It's the weirdest collision because your subconscious is just like a 2-year-old child messing with you sometimes. Well, when it comes to a lot of this stuff, that's the way it works. But when I'm in the mountains, I've learned to pay attention enough to know if something's triggering me, and I'll pay attention to it. And I've had other people say, and I told them, I said, hunters use that. How they see ear twitches. There's no way at 40, 50 yards you should be able to see an ear twitch at just glancing, even glassing through the brush. But once you get attuned and your brain knows what it's looking for, it's amazing what your brain will pick out and how it will keep bringing you back to that spot till you finally see it. So that to me is how I found that. And I think for a lot of people who find stuff, that's what it is. A lot of times these guys are just sitting back in there with nothing else to do. And then they suddenly go, and then I looked over, and then suddenly, and that happens so much more than you want to believe. It's just pure luck.
Right.
Another story I want to tell because it's really, I'm down in Fish Creek Canyon, and there was these, I'm not sure what they are. They probably have something to do with the caldera and the volcanic activity, but there are these holes that go back in the rock. And I'm looking at them, and most of them you could flash a light and see back in them. And I'm saying, well, there's this one I came up to, and it went back 1.5 foot or so, but it curved to the right. I couldn't see around the corner. So I got a stick, and I kept hitting something, and I'm thinking, well, what's back there? It doesn't sound like leaves. What would be back in there? So I finally did the dumbest thing any of us can do. I took my arm, and I stuck my hand back in there all the way up almost to my shoulder to find out what it was. And I couldn't tell by feel. And I start pulling it out, and whatever's there is falling apart. And I'm thinking at first it might be leaves, but it feels like paper. And what it was this cloth, something had been wrapped in cloth, and it was papers. And I think it might have been like Bible, pages from the Bible or something. But there was also this pocket watch from the 1880s, 1870s in there, and an old razor. And it was like someone's little personal belongings kit that they'd shoved back in there for safekeeping. And that was purely just on me looking at the holes and saying, well, this one looks interesting. I'm dumb enough to stick my arm in and see what's in there. No metal detector, no clue, not looking for anything in particular, just stick my arm in a hole.
And no rattlesnakes.
Well, it would have had to climb up 6 feet of exact vertical. It would have no way.
Oh, right, okay.
About a pack rat or something like that, or a scorpion.
Sure.
But I go over, and I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking, well, this area kind of looks like it could be a camp. And I sat down, and there was an old tree that had broken down, and I sat on it. I was sitting there looking around, and I'm kicking around in the dirt, and I'm thinking about it, going, this is the coolest thing. I'm really upset that the paper fell apart, but I don't think there would have been any way to get the paper out. And the cloth, it's just falling apart. It's so old. And I'm thinking, man, this is the coolest thing. Man, this is so cool. And I'm looking at, what I got and all this. And then as I'm kicking around in the dirt, silver dollar pops up from I think it's 1901. And I'm looking at it now. Again, it's no metal detector. I'm not, I just thought, well, this would have been the camp. I'm just imagining in my head. This might have been where that guy camped that put that stuff in that hole. And I'm just kicking in the dirt because I'm just, like you would take a stick and just draw things in the dirt. I'm just killing time, having a cigarette, thinking I'm going to go out of there and kind of like what do I think about this? Just kind of processing it, and I find this. So that's like really cool stuff. Some prospector sometime around the turn of the century is back in there, and something happened to him and he never could return back for his stuff, and he lost a silver dollar down in it. Maybe the same guy, maybe it's not. But it's purely accidental, and I've just been in the right place, and my curiosity and my being fidgety gets to me, and that's why I find the stuff I do. So I find that works of just going and just combing through something, because the times that I went out and just busted my tail trying to dig something out or find something, I've found I fail far more than I'm even mediocrely successful. But I always seem to be successful, oddly enough, at stumbling into things. And when we filmed Legend of the Superstition Mountains, we were shooting the pilot. We were out by the quarter circle U, and we were walking along, and someone said they found an arrowhead. I'm looking around, and I'm thinking, I don't know. I felt like they planted it. And then just something had me go off to the side, and I kind of deterred away from everybody, and I started finding pit houses. No one knew this old village from the Salados existed over there. It's kind of hidden away. No one had ever reported it. No one knew. The people wrote the hiker's guide. People that had been in that area hundreds of times. No one had a clue it was there. And I was finding stone tools and all kinds of stuff laying on the ground. It had been abandoned, sat in an area nobody has any interest in. Cattle probably occasionally wander through there, but for the most part, no one ever thought of looking in there for anything. And I just stumble on these Indian roads. So again, that happens, I think, more. Most discoveries, fine. You get yourself in a general area. If there's something there to be found, you just take your time, and then you go through it, and then you just process. Sometimes you find stuff, sometimes you don't. If you don't find anything because you weren't really looking, you're not disappointed then.
Right.
You're just traveling through, getting to know the area. When I find stuff, it's like, that was amazing. So I'm probably better at being lucky for whatever reason than actually trying. Research, I think I'm pretty good at. But when I'm in the field, the tendency is nothing seems to be exactly what you think you're going to find when you're in the field. And when I've got a lead or something I'm pinpointed on, and I think, I think I got this figured out, I always end up disappointed on that, because I always get there and go, well, nothing's like what I thought it was going to be. It doesn't look the same. The information I was given doesn't fit with what I was told. It's just always a disappointment. But then again, like I said, I get lucky, and then people ask me sometimes, why don't I quit smoking? Because every time I sit down and light a cigarette, I seem to get lucky.
Well, that's why you don't quit.
Yeah. So,
well,
me and Frank have a tendency to light cigarettes and cigars and sit, because we realize, well, that's, we had another one like that with a heartstone. A large heartstone sits in my garage today. And it was a place we were sitting back and always taking a break, smoking a cigarette, having lunch or whatever, taking a breather. And Frank, we actually caught it on video where he was talking, and he flips this rock over, and we've been sitting by that rock forever. We never bothered to flip it over. He flipped it over. Someone had placed it over an alcove. In was a heart they'd shaped. It's probably about a 20-pound stone shaped like a heart. We have no idea why they did it, why they shaped it, why they buried it there. But it was the weirdest thing on camera to even get it. I'm like, holy crap, we've been here before. And the stone was sitting there, and we had no clue. So Frank just got bored and started flipping rocks over,
So does that, you said you really have no clue who put it there. Does it tie in with the Lost Dutchman? Have you been able to put it in?
We don't know if it was another treasure hunter did it for some unknown reason. We don't know why it would be put there. Frank found a blaze on a tree, and we did find the remains of a silver prospect up on the hill, and we found some silver. And we kind of documented it, but we still don't know to this day who might have put it there. We think a gentleman by the name of Bob Ward might have done it because he'd been in the area, so it might have been a way of him leaving a clue to everybody that this is in this area. We got no clue. We have no idea. It was completely puzzling us, but the alcove in the rock was there. The heart-shaped stone that had been kind of worked out, it's a large stone, was placed in there. But they'd put rocks along the edges and then put a big flat stone on it so it wouldn't rest flat on there. So it was almost done suspiciously, and we even looked back at our film footage of going through there for a year or two, and realized we'd been going by there and that rock was just sitting there. Nobody had ever moved it. Not us, not anybody else through that canyon had ever bothered to flip that rock. And we were like, that's cool that we have footage that's been there the whole time. And then 2 years later, Frank just, like I said, he's fidgeting and I'm smoking and we're talking. And Frank flips that over I think he was trying to look at what was on the back side of the rock. And then he looks down and you could just tell by his body language, he goes to pick it up. It's like he's blown away. How the hell did I find this thing here?
And Frank
and
was your
weird things,
Frank was your partner on the show, correct?
He was in the show, and we still go out hiking. And yeah, he's been kind. Me and him have been finding all kinds of crazy stuff in the mountains. We've been taking journals and writings from other people and going out still and doing what I've always done, looking at like why were these guys here? What was the reason for being here? Checking. We spent a year or so until Fish Creek Hill completely collapsed in. We were looking for the Ted DeGrazia paintings that he hid up in there, and we were very close to those. We had that pretty much 99% figured out. And whether someone else had gotten there before us or not, we were very close. And then the fires came through, closed things down. Then the rains came and it completely washed out the road through there. And now it's been closed indefinitely for a year or so.
So what's the story behind those paintings? So what's the story behind the paintings there? What's that all about?
Ted DeGrazia, pretty famous painter from the Southwest, Arizona. Ted did those Christmas cards and stuff. He was really into the Superstitions. And he had a gallery in the Superstitions. There's still a gallery in Tucson called the Gallery of the Sun he built. And Ted's kind of a unique individual. He learned he didn't have to sell his stuff. He could license it, use it for greeting cards and coffee cups and stuff. And he could make a bunch, and he did. He made a lot of money, became a multi-millionaire. Well, what happens with Ted is he finds out in the 70s that the government has a death tax, basically an estate tax. And he was famously known for burning a bunch of paintings in the Superstitions at Angel Basin in protest of the tax. And these were actual paintings. A few people grabbed a few of them up. And he burned them in protest to basically say it isn't fair because basically the value of everything he owned would way supersede any cash his family had. So his family would have to sell everything to basically pay for the tax on the valuation. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So he said, that's not right. And they ended up changing that a bit. I don't know if it ever made him happy. But one of the stories was that he hid stuff. Now, I've heard of numbers. So he hid stuff in the mountains a lot. He was very tuned into the Superstitions. He wrote a book on it. He spent a lot of time prospecting in it. He was very much into the lost Dutchman mine. And at one time, he goes out with Bob Ward. Bob Ward told the story, said Ted wanted to bury a bunch of these paintings, because he always buried stuff out there. And one of his, I think a girlfriend, towards the end of his time, said he would leave sometimes at night, come back with a bag that was empty. So it seemed to be something he liked to do. And Ward said they had these tubes, and I think they were metal pipe tubes, and they took them out, wrapped them in carpet, and then DeGrazia wanted Bob Ward just to drive out and watch his back. And Ward said they ended up drinking so much, and DeGrazia couldn't dig, that Ward ended up doing most of the digging. And they buried the stuff, and then DeGrazia said, look, you can just draw a map, and then after I'm gone or anything happens, you can sell the map or sell the map to my wife, or my wife could sell the map or something like that. And maybe people could, because Bob Ward could draw. He was actually quite intelligent and a great sketch artist. So Ward started drawing these maps, made a book, put the map in it, figured before he died, people would find the DeGrazia paintings. Well, no one finds it. No one can break his codes. I mean, he was actually pretty damn smart. So then he drew a second map. It was a puzzle map and put that together. And then he kept trying, and then he finally died. No one that we know of. Now, there's people that said they found it, but they never came up with proof to show that they found it. And there's supposedly 18 of these original paintings in the metal tubes. They buried, and it looked like 3 different spots. I think it's 6 in each spot. And Frank and I were out, and we figured most of the first map out, and we figured out almost all of the second map, and we cracked most of the code, and we knew we were right on just about the right spot, and it was just a matter
of kind of working it out. In fact, we videoed some of it. We found an old Zippo lighter out there. We found a few things out there. We don't know if it attached to them, but we thought we were really on the right path. And then fire came through, and of course made the soil and all the boulders loose. And then we had all this flooding, and it just took out. Anybody who knows Fish Creek Road knows what I'm talking about. It's a very steep incline road, and it was the only way in and out of that part of the canyon, and it destroyed it. And now no one's had access since that, which was last August or whatever. So when it came time for us to go back in the mountains, we couldn't go back in the mountains because the roads are shut down, and they don't let anybody go down the road because it's busted out, and they don't know if they'll ever be able to repair it. So it kind of put a crunch to us, but we also realized nobody else knows where we do where, the clues and stuff we did. We've never shared it with anyone other than my son. My son's the only other person that knows some of the landmarks that we figured out. But we were never able to get the boots on the ground. We figured we needed a few more days to work out the last of the details. And that's kind of a disappointment because it wasn't necessarily, other than make a big deal out of it, we found it. The coolest deal for us, we thought, was being able to put those up on the walls of our houses.
Right.
Because they're original grazias no one's ever seen. It's part of a treasure thing. And Frank and I thought, who cares about the treasure hunting part? It'd be just so cool to put I have the grazias at home. And to have those original one-of-a-kind that were part of that mystique would have been just absolutely awesome. So I was in that just out of a personal thing of being a fan of the grazias. And as far as the fan of the superstitions and all that, I just thought that would be just such an awesome thing to find. And I know a couple people, there's been a couple rumored people said they found them, but they never showed anybody any proof that they found anything. So I think they're still out there. There's 18 paintings. And then he made a film. It was an odd film, and he portrayed himself of going out with a Mexican boy, and then they buried a bunch of stuff in a cave and blew it shut. And people later said, the reason he made the film was because he actually took hundreds of paintings, put them in a cave or an old mine somewhere, and blew the thing shut. So it was another one of his ways to tell people, hey, there's this out there too. So he was kind of an enigma. Anyone that ever researches him, he was a bit of an enigma. One of the crazy things is people would ask him how many children he had, and he changed it each time. How many times you've been married? He had no problem with just telling stories. He didn't see it as a lie. He just saw himself as being entertaining. And so he wasn't doing it to harm anyone. He just did it as just a storyteller of just kind of in a joking way. How many children you have? Well, I must have 19 or 20, maybe 21.
Right.
But he only had a few kids. And he was very aware of that. But it was that whole, you know what I'm saying? He liked to spin. That was his public persona type thing. So you mix all that up, and he was doing films about it. It was just to us, we found it intriguing because he's a very genius person. He knew how to market. I mean, how many artists understand, I can own my own art, and I'll just license it. And then everybody acted like, well, he's a sellout. Well, you know what? He's a sellout, but he was living very well. He did very, very well for a sellout.
Sure.
He had control of his own art completely.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's kind of the way music is these days in that sense. Everybody, you used to want to get like the big record deal and make all that money, and now it's just like you want to be in control of everything and try to make all the money yourselves. And I think a lot of that might be, people have ideas about how that could be on TV as well and that type of thing. And I don't know exactly how that works. But leading into that with the TV show, how did that all come about? Were you hanging out with Frank prior to that, or is that when you met Frank leading into the TV show? Did you breed him into the TV show?
Let me touch upon one thing. Pedro Grazi was very similar to Led Zeppelin. He figured out how to get the label and everybody to give him the money. And then he ended up owning his own label, his own music, his own rights, and had control where they didn't have to put out greatest hits or singles unless they wanted. So that's probably the closest thing to what Degrassi was like, because artists never have that kind of control, where they basically can tell the label, there's no single. That we're just releasing the album without our name on it. That's just the way it is. You take it. And he had that control. So that's, if people are looking for a musical or some kind of, I don't think in entertainment as far as television film, I don't think anybody could ever pull that off. That would be unique from the start. They were probably, and I think in music, they were one of the few bands that from the beginning to end owned it all. I mean, they had control, and that was a testament that they had that figured out from the start. So, which is why they became all very wealthy. So,
Sure,
but
sure.
TV show.
Right.
I did not know Frank before the television show. I met him. I didn't know who he was. I couldn't have told you his name. I'd met him several times. And we crossed paths, but actually my friend Randy Wright, who I talked about earlier, had to remind me who he was, because I talked to Frank. I didn't, and it was not personally wrong with it. It was just we saw each other once in a blue moon. Up in the mountains, we have a thing called the Dutch Hunter Rendezvous we do for a weekend in late October, early November. And I'd see Frank there, and he'd talk to me about stuff I knew in the superstitions and stuff. But I didn't know who Frank was. I just knew he was some guy that came out there, and he'd ask me questions and stuff. And I knew he was from back east, and that was about it. It was February 2014. I was getting messages and stuff because we had the Dutch Hunter Rendezvous. And we had a Facebook page and a kind of a website for it. And a production company got hold of me and was asking me, hey, would you be interested in doing something on television? And I said, no, but what are you looking for? And they said, well, we're looking for locations, stories, people. And I said, well, I'll give you a bunch of people who might be interested. And here's some sites, and I'll send you along some stuff out of my archives, some stories, some of the Jim Bark notes and stuff, some various stories to get you guys started. That was my involvement. So then they called me back and said, well, we don't like those guys. And they said, well, who would you take? Who would you say are the top 5, 10 Dutch hunters? And so I gave them that list. And then I told them, and then they said, well, we want to kind of work out, can you help us with some of these locations? Because we don't know the people. We don't want to cold call them. Would it work? Could you give us contact or let them know and make sure it's okay for us to call them? So I did that. So I was kind of working for I was a production consultant. And my buddy Randy Wright kind of got interested in the whole thing, and he said, well, I'm going to interview for the show. I said, go for it. I couldn't care less. So Randy's interviewing for the TV show, and I'm helping them and giving them names, and they're like, well, we don't like that guy. We don't like this. Well, here's what and then the original show was 2 groups of 5 people, and they're going to compete trying to find a mine, and whoever, I don't know how they were going to figure out a winner. So they're pitching me this idea, and I'm thinking, that's stupid. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Well, I'm not interested. I said, I'll help you out on all this stuff, his locations and everything else. I'm not interested in doing the show, but make sure I get invited down when you're filming stuff, because I'd like to check it out and see what you guys are doing. They're like, okay, cool, we'll stay in touch. So they keep getting back to me, and they said, well, can you Skype with us and do a Skype with us and talk to us? So I do the Skype, and I talk to them. And I was in my work truck, and I had my cowboy hat. I'm sitting there talking to them on my lunch break. And we got done, and they said, would you please interview for the TV show? And I said, no. I said, I have no interest. Because I'd been pitched other things before. There was a film I did that was kind of a Blair Witch Project film where they filmed a documentary, and then they do the horror film and try to put them together. And it didn't really turn out. And I was kind of like, I'm not, there have been no Dutchman television shows. And I'm kind of like, I'm not sure. And they were pitching me the idea. And I was like, nah, I don't. Well, later that week, Randy Wright calls me on the phone. And he's saying, hey, dude, I'm married. I got kids now. I'm going to get in the mountains as much. But if you would interview, we could do this show together. And that would be like something we could hinge our partnership on after 10, 15 years. That would be a very cool thing to do that together before everything's said and done. And if we never get out and spend the time like we used to in the mountains, that would be a very cool thing, like Sim Lee and Jim Barks and their books, and and I understood that side of it. And I thought, okay, you're my friend, and that would be cool to hang out with you for a month and a half and film, and do that, because I get to hang with my buddy in the mountains. Well, damn, and somebody else is paying for it. So he convinces me to interview, and then I set up the interview, and I do the interview, and then they want to do another interview. They want to do another interview. And then me and Randy are talking, and he's like, I don't know. And that's where Frank popped in, because Frank popped in at one point. His name popped up. And they asked me if I knew him, and I said, they had to kind of remind me of a few things. And I'm like, oh, it's that guy. And then I had to ask Randy that night, who's that guy? I don't really remember him. And he said, oh, that's the guy, from Pennsylvania, the cop, ex-cop, and all this. And, oh, okay, he seems all right. He's kind of a close popper. He's kind of, that cigar drives me nuts, but okay, whatever. Frank seems all right. And they got these Bigfoot hunters and all these guys from all these wacky different areas of life in there. They had a guy from Chasing Mummies, Dr. Alan Morton, who was an archaeologist or something brought in. And so when we go to do basically what the pilot and the casting call, they say, we need you guys for 3, 4, 5 days, so can you show up? Well, I wouldn't stay at the hotel. Right from the start, I'm the rebel, right? So I basically say, I'll show up every morning. You can pay my gas. I'll come down and see what you guys are about. And I'll sign this little contract to do this, but I'm not sure about you guys. So we start doing it, and I realize Randy's not there the first day. I'm like, dude, where are you? Because I'm expecting Randy to be there, show up the first day while we're doing stuff for breakfast. And we're doing our first breakfast, and I'm meeting all these guys, and I'm like, I haven't seen Randy. And then I called him, because I don't ask anybody. He says, they never called me. They never told me to come in or anything. So then I asked them, and they said, well, we don't think we can use him. And I'm like, well, what the hell? It's the reason I'm mainly here. So then at that point, I'm just kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. They're paying me X amount a day. It's a weekend. Why not? I'll spend an extra couple of days. I'll do this. Because at least I'm learning something about television and what they're doing. But I don't think they're going to have me because I'm kind of a little bit on the short side with them. I'm kind of like thinking this is a bit ridiculous. I'm not going to act. I'm not going to play drama queen for you guys. I'm not into any of this BS. The other guys are living it up. These other guys, they had a production office, and I would go down and watch people, and they're like characters going off about different, they'd ask them about people they've never met like me, and they're going on about me. And I'm like, you don't even know me. I don't know who the hell you are. But they're like acting, and I'm just like, what the hell is this? So at that point, I'm talking to Frank, because Frank realizes me and Woody are the only two people he knows, so he gravitates to us. Him and Woody are good friends. And Woody's around me a bit, but I didn't know Woody at all at that point. I'm just meeting him. And there was a guy named Mike McChesney. I'll throw Mike in there because he works for me now. But Mike was down there, and he was like the other person I knew. And he was there for a couple of days. I tried to get him on because I knew him, because you want familiarity. And he kind of wanted to do it. And we're going day by day. And then one day I noticed we're doing this thing on the where the quarter circle U is, where the ranch house is. We're on the porch. And they bring like 4 or 5 guys up, and I have to sit on this chair and talk there with everybody, and then I leave. And we do this like 7, 8 times, but each time they change out people, but I'm always sitting in the chair. And so finally I turned to Frank, and I said, I don't know what the hell's going on, but this is going to take forever to go through all of us sitting in that chair. And Frank goes, you don't get it, do you? I said, what do you mean? He says, it's your show. You're like the leader. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like the production consultant. He's like, no. You're the guy in charge. We're the guys trying to go out with you. We're trying to get a job with you. And I was like, seriously, you got to be kidding me. So then I go over to talk to the producer, and I'm like, what the hell is this about? And he says, no, they saw you in your black hat and everything else, and they said that's the one, and everything hinges for us on that. So if you do this, we get to make a TV show. If you don't do this, we don't know what we're going to do, because we're going to have to scrap it. Because we don't have someone to fill your role. We need a Dutch hunter, someone with experience in the mountains, someone that knows all this stuff that can work with us in production on stories. We need everything you're bringing to the table. All these other guys don't have any experience in the mountains like you do. And so now you're put on the spot, because you're like, oh, I even got a few people I know here. And, okay, so everything, all the money coming into Apache Junction, all the money coming in, everything they're going to do with this TV show is suddenly all about me willing to do it. And if I walk out of here and say, well, no, I'm not going to do this, then it all falls through. So I'm kind of sitting there, and I talked to Randy, and I said, dude, this is what they're pitching at me. He said, do it. You can get the time off and do it. Because you're only going to sign up to do it one time. And I didn't realize about the contract for 8 consecutive seasons and the stuff they throw at you and how they tie you up. So I was like, yeah, okay. And that's how it all kind of played out and happened. So really, even after the first week of filming, which none of that was used, the only people really around were Frank and Woody. Eric Magnuson was there like the last day with a couple buddies of his. And in fact, they were trying to get me to pick Eric Magnuson, and I wouldn't pick him. I kept picking other people all the time. Because they kept shortening it from, it'll be 7 people, it'll be 6 people, it'll be 5. Okay, it's 5 people now. Because 5's good, because we can take 3 in the mountains, leave 2 here. They had this whole reasoning for 5. And then they decided it was me, Frank, Woody. I don't know who the fourth person was. They had someone picked. And then there was this one other guy they were going to bring in. And they wanted Magnuson, and I didn't know Magnuson. It was nothing personal. It was purely from the point I didn't know who he was. I got to talk to him for about all of 30 seconds, and I saw him like doing interviews on cameras around him, but I did not know who he was. So it was nothing personal. It was just when they ask you, who would you pick? You're picking people you talked to longer.
Right, because you're looking for that chemistry. You're looking for that familiarity.
I was looking for the familiarity. Like there was a guy, I'm trying to remember his name now because he's going to hate me for forgetting his name. Casey Edwards. I think he's up in Wyoming. Hey, Casey, you crazy guy. But I wanted Casey on the show because Casey was the only other person that smoked cigarettes besides me. So me and Casey. I want Casey on the show because I want my buddy to smoke with because Randy's not there now. So my logic is, if Frank has Woody, who he's known, I don't have that guy to watch my back, so I'm looking around who I think's cool. There was a guy that came in with Magnuson. His name was TJ. I thought TJ was really cool, and we had some good talks. He took the time to come over and sit with me. And, of course, I don't realize these guys are, like, sucking up to me possibly. I'm hoping it was just being friendly. But I'm not reading into that because I don't think I have any power, you know. I kind of feel like I'm being duped into this. And Magnuson was just not on the radar at all. And in fact, when I got done, I was asking him, who's Magnuson? And then Frank was standing off to the side. He said, he's the ginger. He's the redhead kid. I'm like, who? And if they ever show those tapes, it's funny because I was clueless who we were talking about. And they're saying, no, you got to talk. The History Channel really likes him. And I'm like, I don't even know who we're talking about. So then I had to make up stuff about Magnuson. And they were feeding me stuff because it was for History Channel, and I don't know why, but I have to talk about everybody in the group, and some of them I had no idea who they were, but I had to. They wanted me to make up stuff, and then in the end, I said, I'm shitty at this. I'm horrible at this. I can't make stuff up like that because on the fly, because I don't know who these guys are. I'm confused. I don't know which one I'm talking about, and in the end, that's what they're looking for. So anybody who ever wants to get involved in this, they were looking for the guy that was resistant, that really didn't want to buy into it, didn't care about the lines. When they fed them lines, was looking at them like they were nuts, saying, I'm not going to say that. They wanted that guy for the show. And everybody else was trying to go work into it and say, no, I can do that for you, no problem. I was the guy saying, no, I'm not saying that. And that's what got me the part where I was they just kept saying, no, that's our guy. It'll drive him crazy, and he's not going to be happy, but that's our guy because he makes it authentic. And that was it.
Wow. That just blows my mind that they wanted you. You kept saying, no, I'm not doing it. No way, I'm not going to do it. You got to bring Randy in. They don't call Randy. That kind of takes a little bit of the wind out of your sails because you wanted your partner there, your smoking buddy. And then they're throwing Magnuson at you. And you're like, who is this guy? I don't know this guy. And you know Frank, you don't know Woody. And then they're putting the show together and they're filming this stuff and they're feeding the other guy lines and they're trying to feed you lines. And I'm not saying that.
Oh, no, there was some Frank would tell you that I was so mad. Bob Shoes, who was in the show, a good friend of mine, Bob Shoes. Bob had to take me aside one day and talk to me and tell me to settle down. Because I was getting so mad some days. Like, I'm done. I quit the first week. I quit and went home. I just gave up my hotel room, went home, said, screw this, I'm not coming back. And the production company had to call me and say, you checked out of your room? I said, yeah, I have no intention of coming back. Well, we'll sue you. Okay, good luck. Bye. Click. I didn't care because I'm like, I didn't sign up for this, and I don't know what you guys are doing and what's happening here, but this is stupid. It feels hokey. You guys are like pulling shit off the internet. You're not pulling stuff out of the material I gave you. And I want nothing to do with this. You guys, there's a call sheet every day. And we were riding in my truck, but they didn't want me to have a call sheet. Well, I'm one of your vehicles bringing the talent in. I'm actually one of the crew, technically, as we run around and stuff. And I'm in the production office, and you're pulling stories out of me, but you're not letting me know what's going on. Like, everything's got to be hidden from me. And I'm like, that's bull. I want to know what you're thinking of filming and what ideas of mine are you using and why. And I said, it's not that I'm prepared for anything. There's no script or anything, but at least I got an idea of where we're going, what I need to pack, what I need to tell the other guys to grab. And so they finally broke down and said, look, we'll do this spot for you. We'll do this. And I said, it's not about money. But I said, I want a smaller room, believe it or not. I want a small room with the crew and by the guys down the hill because they were all down the hill from me. I had a big suite with a jacuzzi in the room and a fireplace. They treated me like I was Brad Pitt. And I was like, no, I want a small room. I want a desk because I want to work and do stuff at the desk and clean my guns at night when I'm down at the hotel. And so I need this. And I said, I don't even need a comfortable bed. I'll sleep on a couch because I just bring my own blankets. And they could not believe, I wanted a microwave. Or no, a toaster, because I like to eat, because I didn't want to eat the junk they brought in most of the time, so I was eating a lot of tuna fish sandwiches, believe it or not. And I had these little tuna packs and stuff, and I had my loaf of bread. And I said, I need a toaster to toast my bread, because I like my tuna fish sandwich with toasted bread. And they were just blown away that I was simplifying everything of like, you guys got to accommodate. And they were like, okay, fine. So they put me between the director of photography and one of the other cameramen and DeLeo. Then I was very happy, because then I was around guys where I could, sit on the patio and talk to them and stuff. And I wasn't up with the producers and stuff, which I just didn't care for. Who in the middle of summer wants to come in town and sit in a jacuzzi in their room?
Right. Yeah.
The fireplace. I mean, come on. Give me a break.
Especially in Arizona.
I'd do it. I had a room that was almost 3/4 of the size of the house I live in. And I was like, I'm one person. I have a bed. This is a giant bed. It's like, what the hell is with this? This is stupid. And my other big problem was the patio there didn't have a roof over it. So when it rained, I was out in the rain all the time. And I'm like, I want a little, give me a smaller patio that has a roof at least. Which is funny because the first night I'm out there and it's starting to drizzle, I lit a cigarette and we're waiting because it was before we started filming. And Eric DeLeo comes walking by and he says, hey, what's up? And I said, hey. And he goes, who are you? You were with the production staff. I said, my name. And I told him my name. And then he told me who he was. I didn't know who DeLeo was. He was walking by. I said, hey, dude, come on in. Have a Dr. Pepper. Sit down for a few. And that's how me and DeLeo met. And he was just coming in to get his room. And he ended up hanging out on the patio with me by my room. And then, of course, he was like expecting this huge, great room because I think he saw mine. I have a jacuzzi. I got couches. I got fireplace, multiple TVs and a shower and all this fancy stuff. And then, of course, he got this little room down the hill. And next thing, I think he was surprised that I just moved in next to them. But I came back after the first week because it was part of about a number of different things. But they had to change a couple things because I said, I am not going to. The one thing we have to do is if I won't do it, you can get someone else to do it. But if I won't do it, I won't do it. As long as we agree on that. And that was a big thing for them was like, they said, okay, finally. And there's times in the show I just wouldn't talk about certain things because I said, that's stupid. I don't agree with it. And I said, I can't help anybody else. They're their own person. But I said, I just refuse to address that. So there were things taken from me, which is fine because the other guys needed stuff to do. You can't just have me running around talking all the time, which is what we're doing tonight. But we couldn't have a TV show based on me just telling everybody what to do and, how to do it and everything. So it works out that way. But it was insane to me because Eric Magnuson's brought in as a metal detecting guy, but the best metal detecting guy I've ever met in my life is Frank Augustine. So it's confusing. Eric DeLeo's brought in as the geologist rock hound that goes out and prospects. But that's Woody's like the best prospector and one of the best gold panners and individuals I've ever met in my life. But Woody now becomes the Indian expert. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? So everybody's like doing these weird role reversals. And then we're all having to sit around and coach each other on how to do what they need to do because, Magnuson knew nothing about Jesuits, never heard of Jesuits really before. So then we have to kind of give him a crash course because he's got to sit in front of a camera and talk about the Jesuits. And he's got to make stuff up. And I'm like, you can't make stuff up because that won't work because people will be pulling that apart fast.
Yeah, and that's what blows my mind.
Now, when people say that's fake, it's not necessarily fake. There was stuff they wanted to talk about, but you can't have Wayne and Frank talk about every single thing. which you'll notice the first couple of episodes or so, it's a lot of me and Frank because we were the only two that really knew what we were talking about.
Right.
And you can't have Wayne and Frank just do the whole thing and then have them kind of go on barbs and yell at each other occasionally, because then there's no reason for the other three guys. And if we watch the show, the other guys actually get more time as it went because there was more and more Frank and I refused to do. We were like, no, get DeLille to get Magnuson to do it. Magnuson hasn't done anything in 2 weeks. You know, he's had 3 lines. Come on, let him do something. Because we just thought it's not fair.
Right, you guys were sharing the wealth, so to speak.
Well, and even more on that, we filmed 6 weeks initially. The second to last day, I had half a day off. Other than that, I filmed every day. The other guys would some days not even be around because I'd be at Clay Worth, or I'd be seeing Bob Shoes, or I'd be doing something else. There were entire days those guys got the day off and were out eating dinner and doing stuff, and I was filming all day by myself. I got to me to a point where they would sometimes let Frank come with me and ride with me, because that's the other weird thing is the production guys wouldn't ride with me on those days. They would all take the crew vehicle and then have me in my truck by myself all day. And there's times we were driving like 2, 3, 4 hours, and I'm like, man, this is boring. I'm just talking to you guys, and then I drive my truck for a couple hours, and I talk to you guys, and I drive another hour over here. We talk to you guys. So they started putting Frank in the truck with me till he got bored and he didn't want to do it anymore because I needed someone to talk to after a while. You know, I was like, I don't understand. You know, you got me around these guys, and we're supposed to be a team, but then they're all off. You know, they went to a baseball game one day, I think. It's like they're telling me about stuff they're doing. They went out to dinner, and I'm coming back in at 8, 9 o'clock at night, and I'm like, well, what's going on? You know, and that part was weird. There was times we were in the mountains and times we were together. And then there's times that I was just kind of like the first one there in the morning and the last one to go to bed.
Right.
And the other guys, and when those guys were dragging with me, when they did have those guys, like when we do the pool hall thing and stuff like that, we were coming back, and Eric DeLille and Magnuson finally got a rental car. I think he finally got them convinced to give him a rental car. DeLille had no money, couldn't cash his checks, and didn't have any transportation. And he'd show up at my room. I'm hungry. So I'd get him, and we'd go running around Apache Junction looking for someplace open to grab ourselves some food because there was no food, and I think he got tired of my tuna fish sandwiches. I guess I'm a desert guy. I'll survive on anything. So I was fine. Yeah, it was hot. It was we started in July with the pilot stuff, and then we wrapped up at the beginning of October, and there wasn't much of a day under 100. So you want to eat stuff like tuna fish sandwiches and just make a liquid diet because it's just most of the food doesn't sit well with you because you're in the heat all day.
Nope, I know that feeling.
But I think for a lot of people that want to do reality shows, I would tell them I adjusted to it. Once I was done, I learned so much about it that I've been able to do other shows, and I enjoy it now. But the big problem was when I initially did it, if you think you're going to make a bunch of money, one, that's not happening. If you think they're going to even pay you when you're done, they're probably going to owe you money when the show's airing because you're going to have to fight for your money. It's just none of it works like you think it's going to be. And it's very frustrating because all of us think we have our integrity, and the one thing they're hoping is you'll sell your integrity out and just be good with stuff. And I was so heavily, I'm not going to say monitored, but I got to do the Huffington Post. I got to do some stuff for Arizona Highways. I got to do some national interviews. But every time I did an interview, there was someone from History Channel and A&E and the production company online with us when I did the interview. Because they did not want me going rogue, I guess. I don't know what rogue would have been. But they were very careful in discussing with me, and they would interrupt questions and say, well, he's not going to answer that. I'd be like, why? But they were very careful with what I did. Now, I don't think the other guys got that treatment. I don't even think they offered them a lot of interviews. I think they just told them, find what you can and clear it with us, and you're fine. With me, they would say, we got so-and-so on the line tomorrow. We're going to do an interview. And I'd say, okay. Yeah, and you don't get paid for that. That's after you're done. And they'll just keep having you do stuff for them. And that's part of the contract. So you're going to put other hours and time in. And I think the other guys in the end, they had no connections. I had phone numbers from people at History and A&E, because they had to keep in touch with me with interviews and marketing certain things. And I didn't feel like a bigwig on it. I thought everybody was getting the same thing. And then I found out later as I was the only person who had all these phone numbers because I was the only person they were talking to, which I don't know what that meant in the end, because I still to this day don't really know how they operate.
So was any part of the TV show, as far as like some of the locations you went to and some of the lore that they talk about, I know that Woody brings up, there's some Indian legends that have to do with, people disappearing in the Superstition Mountains or people being beheaded was there anything on the TV show that as far as the story arc and the storyline, was any of that based on real stories or real situations?
A lot of stuff was based on very real things. The problem is we go in the production office when we come in town. When we were in the field, they kind of let me hang with the guys. So anytime we're out of town, I'm with the guys. They ride in my truck. We're always together. And if they interview us separately, but we're always together. When they're interviewing two guys, the other three of us were sitting in my truck, hanging out together, just sitting in the truck or hanging wherever we were at camp. So, but when we're in town, they would always have me come in the production office after we got in. I get a shower and then I go back. And then they would have me tell stories and ask me about things they read on the internet. And I would tell them what I knew about the documented story. And that would seep its way in. The Black Legion problem was they kind of got a gist of some couple things I said. But I didn't know how to quite phrase it to them to some degree. And then they just cold-cocked Woody and turned to him and said, we're sitting around a campfire, and they had me tell a story. Because they'd always have us all tell a story about something. And they rarely used any of that. But they said, well, Wayne already talked. So Woody, tell us about the Black Legion. Woody looks at me. And I could see in the fire his face of like, what the hell's that? So I had to lean over and give him like a 30, 40-second rundown and say, just make the rest up in the middle. And so Woody had no idea what he was talking about at the time because he didn't have any time, no prep, nothing. And then they put together something that was kind of based in between. Now, my thing was there's a group of people in the mountains that people have always called the Black Legion. And it's a group of people probably watching sacred sites, burial sites, that type of thing. And it's probably not a real organized thing. It's the Anglo guys referring to those guys when they see them as the Black Legion. So if you get it, they don't have a group called the Black Legion. It's just that's what people would call when they'd see those groups in the mountains. And they generally wore black or black hats and stuff, and that was the thing about it. Well, then I told them there's also the thing, some stories about these spirit things that are like 7-8 feet tall that are referred to as possibly the Black Legion as guardians over some of those sites. And I said, I think these are two different things, two different stories. One I think is very mythological and folklore, but the other seems very real. And the Black Legion thing was, this is where I make a mistake, is they would put handprints and things on cars. So you come back to your car, and that one of the ways they would have certain things they'd leave on your car, handprints and different things, and arrows and stuff to tell you stay out of this area. Okay, they weren't shooting at you, they weren't threatening. It would be like a thing to tell guys, hey, we were watching you. This is an area you need to be careful in. So the production company, you imagine trying to tell someone in 20, 30 seconds all this. So Woody came up with what he could at the best at what he did. And it's very brief, and then they do their spin on the whole spiritual thing. And that's when I was learning a lesson of when you sit there and talk to people, they're asking you questions, but you're trying to formulate and say, okay, it's two different things, and it's this and this and this, and trying to make it very serious. And then you suddenly realize it's getting enveloped into all this ridiculousness. And then they hand it to someone else who doesn't know what they're talking about. And they did a disservice to it because I thought, and that was the day after that, we had a huge argument in the mountains about where I felt they were being disrespectful to indigenous people, because that should have been a respectful thing of this group of people that possibly can be out there watching over things
Would you like someone digging up your grandma and grandpa? Most people wouldn't. Well, they can feel the same way. And I felt like you guys are acting like this is the Old West and that kind of thing. And I expect the people from Hollywood to be a little more respectful or a little more sensitive to that. And they were playing that old BS kind of old Western attitude, the only good Indian's a dead Indian type of thing. And I'm like, we're not going to do that on this show. This is getting stupid. And so I said, I'm going to work this night out. We're going to work this out as what whoever's doing this is playing around. And it's BS because that's what it is. And I'm going to do it. And that's how I kind of played it. And we got there. But that was them incorporating things. Now, there was always strange stuff, but it was, it was like with Magnus and with the Jesuits. It was, and he did take the time to go back to his room and get online and start learning some stuff. But me and Frank are trying to explain stuff. You can't take something you grow up or you hear about and you've learned and read books on and then make some other guy the expert overnight. And it was really wrong for them to do it to him. But again, well, Wayne just told this story about this. So we need someone to do this. We need someone to do that. And then unexpectedly they do that. And I would always step in and say, do you want me to tell the story? And they'd say, no. Well, then Woody becomes our indigenous expert. But the problem is that's not in any way Woody's groove. And it got him interested later, but then it becomes him trying to pick my brain. And Frank is from Pennsylvania. So far as Southwest tribal type stuff, what does he know, So him and Frank are drinking White Russians, and Frank can't give him a clue what to say. You're trying to help someone, but how do you teach what you've learned over 40 some odd years and having friends like this and all? It was very difficult. But when you're filming 12, 14 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week, for 6 weeks straight, guess what happens? That stuff is so small that it doesn't really hit your radar very well. So you're like, yeah, last night we sat around for 10, 15 minutes. That was funny when Woody was trying to talk about the Black Legion. The problem is when the show comes out, you realize they cut 4.5 hours out of that night, but they use that one little piece. You do not know what they're going to use. So our show could have been a complete comedy like Mountain Monsters because of us just joking around and acting like a bunch of college kids at times. So it's what they edit and what they use. And with the time when you're doing stuff, I learned to be very careful, but you never know what they're going to use. And that was hard to learn until after the show's out. We didn't realize when you're talking, they ask you the same question 4 different ways to see how they can get you to answer it.
So were you, once the show came out and you watched it from week to week, there were 6 episodes. What were your thoughts on it as you're watching it and you finish all 6 episodes? How do you feel about how it turned out?
First episode is 42 minutes long. First episode took 6 days to film. Took something around 70 some odd hours. Where is everything? Because it jumped so fast, and it's just, there was stuff I couldn't really remember well. And then there's stuff I'm like, that doesn't make any sense in context. Because they have so much footage, they can put it together in a certain way. So I have this problem, and I've gotten better, because I didn't even end up watching the last episode purely because I had to be somewhere else. But it was a huge problem when people would ask me about the show, and I didn't watch it that closely. So when I would talk about things that weren't in the show because my memory is of this. And then I have to go sometimes still now watch the show and see if that's in there because my memory is of that. When we found quartz veins up around Black Cross Butte, and Frank found a gold nugget, and they didn't put that in the show. I think they briefly showed me finding the quartz veins, but we found a bunch of sifted dirt and a bunch of areas where they'd been prospecting and stuff. But none of that, hours of that, is not in the footage of us finding gold and stuff. But in my head, you have to remember that whole day of us finding the gold and talking about what was around there and trying to look into it. That's part of my memory of doing the show. So there's 4 or 5 minutes of an entire day. And those 4 or 5 minutes, don't connect to me very well because I remember how much went on. When we were done, I asked them, I said, how about, why didn't we do this when I found when I found that quartz and we had it assayed at 3/4 ounces a ton? How come we said it was a 1/4 ounce a ton? They said, well, that we wanted to minimize it. Well, how come we didn't show the gold nuggets that Frank found? Because we needed to minimize it because the show wouldn't be as good if you guys were finding stuff all the time.
That makes no
So
sense.
that confuses us. But see, this is after the fact, nothing you can do about it. But we're so confused because when Frank's telling people stories, talking about stuff, and people are looking at him blank because it's not in the show. And I had to explain to him, watch it again, Frank. None of that stuff's in the show. Our memory has it, but it's not really there. So the public doesn't get to see what we live. And that's why I told a production company later, if I did that ever again, I'd ask to watch the show before because it was so confusing. Because people would ask me questions, and I'd have to go back and look because the story that you're kind of seeing isn't the story that's in my head that I remember living.
Right.
And that's hard to resolve because you're looking at it as, oh, this is really cool, but then you guys bounce to here about it. But I remember as weeks taking place. And you're thinking like, well, it was just last week. No, it was last week, but it was a week. There was a whole bunch of days in between for me. So when we went to Bob's Shoes in about midway through the episodes, they were like bankrupt of ideas. They were trying to say, well, where do we go next? And we were talking, and they weren't interested in where we wanted to go next. And I said, you know what? Here's where I want to go, but we need to find a way to go there. And I said, because I think this is a hot spot, and this is what we should be doing. And so we went and talked about Shoes. Well, Shoes had the Frank Fish map and the Gonzalez map, and he found a spot that put them together, and it made me think of my old thing of Frank Fish saying there should be a second map to this, and it lined up, and it was a very cool lead. And the only problem is once we got there and we got on it, then again, everything's edited for the next 3 weeks that doesn't really make sense to what we were actually doing there because we were finding gold. So they made a show that was very exciting and is correct in its own unique way, but it's so edited correct, it doesn't make sense to me. Because to you, you go, oh, yeah, the guys went out, Frank and Woody and Wayne, and our original thing right from the start is we're going to chase the load goal. And I asked the second day of filming, what happened to what we talked about yesterday? And they said, what? That we're tracing the load goal. Oh, no, we're working off this map that Frank has. I said, well, what happened to the original idea we had the other day? Because we've already changed. I'm confused. So, but I don't realize they're going to edit stuff out. So I'm just thinking, we're working in a state of continuity that I don't realize television doesn't work in. They're just filming as much as they can, and then they'll work the story out. There was a whole thing about me meeting one of the Peralta family members, and this whole big, long bit we did, and this whole thing about, working with them and stuff. And it's nowhere in the show. And I took it like a day and a half doing that. And I'm just blown away that was just completely X'd out of the show.
Well, I know watching the show, like a couple weeks ago, I recently went back and rewatched it because I wanted to have a base of reference for what we were talking about. And one of the things it's a cliffhanger, literally. One of the things is in the very last episode, you guys are up in there and Frank's sitting on the boat and you guys are up in the mountains and you come across what appears to be, it's a cave, but it's almost like a cliff face with a ladder going up the cliff. What's that all about? I mean, how does that tie into everything? Is that a legit spot?
Everyone understands. I knew the place existed. I'd never been out there. We were going up that canyon is known as Crucifix Canyon, not because of the cross we saw. That cross is a natural formed cross that we show in the show. There's actually a crucifix in there for someone who died somewhere else in the canyon. That's why it's called Crucifix Canyon. And it's a crucifix. That's a cross.
Okay.
It's not called Cross Canyon.
Sure.
Normally, most people come in through Mesquite Flat. They had us going back in there. And they actually had us go to a different location at first. And we were on the wrong side. We were on the wrong side of the river. And I pointed that out.
And so they had us come back over, and then we, the cross and stuff. That had been a guano farm at one time. Now, I'm never going to give away what's up in there, and a lot of it, because there's a lot of people said this is baloney and this is fake, and I went in there and I did this, and I know what was up in there because the footage was so bad they couldn't use most of the footage on the show, because when you're in an open area in a cave like that, the light just dissipates. The footage is horrible. Any open, large space, the footage is absolutely unusable.
Absolutely.
It just basically is a light just you see bats flashing around, and you hear DeLeo scream. You hear screams like a schoolgirl, okay? And you're hoping the damn guy doesn't fall back out there. But I know what's in there and how it's set up. And they use very, very little of that. We were up there for probably close to 2 hours with someone up in the cave. They couldn't put a drone in because obviously the bats. We were getting closer. I had to mention that, the sun will go down eventually. It had been raining all day. We were covered in bat water. It was miserable. One of the crew got hypothermia because the temperatures kept, with the rain, dropping and then coming back up and then dropping. And you were shivering for 10 minutes, and then a half hour later, you were just like boiling in the humidity. And it was just miserable. And the part I'll never forget is when they first went to attempt to go in, DeLeo gets on the ladder, and Magnuson was talking to him with his mouth open.
Oh, no.
And all the fat guano went into Magnuson. I have photographs of it. The next picture you see them is on their hands and knees and 2 feet of bat guano sinking as they're puking their guts out because they both got bat guano down their throats.
Oh.
And they're vomiting, and it's a series of pictures of them vomiting. And then I took a picture of Chris Rabb, who was on Jackass. Christian Rabb, and Rabb himself was one of our cameramen. And I have a picture of Christian Rabb, who has the biggest saucer eyes you've ever seen in your life when he realized what we were into. I was standing about 40, 50 feet away because I refused to walk in the guano because I realized one problem. We were soaking wet, and everything was going to stick with the guano. I was like, oh, my God, this is horrible. So I stood on this rock, and I told the producer, I'm not moving from here. I had a bum leg at that point, and I almost decided to climb the ladder because DeLeo was literally scared to death to do it. But my problem was I could climb up the ladder with the bad leg. I couldn't climb down. So I would have been able to get up using arm strength and stuff, but getting down because of the rungs and looking down and all, I wouldn't have been able to put the weight. Going up a ladder is different than going down. So I told them, I said, if we got enough rope, we could check the rope, but if there's enough rope that I can secure myself, I will try it and come down. And they said, no, DeLeo's got to do this because that's what he's supposed to do. And so we got in a big argument, so then I had to coax him up. But I know what it looks like in there. I've had people say, oh, I went in there and I did this, and oh, I did this. Problem is, none of their descriptions fit with what I know.
So it's essentially just a cave. But the description.
I will say that it's a series of caves full of bats. Guys did guano harvesting there at one time. And what came out of it is we couldn't do anything with it. The Forestry Service were totally ticked off that we went up there and filmed. We didn't get a permit. We operated without permits most of the time. How History Channel got away with that, I don't know. But we got out of there, and then there was a big fracas about it. A lot of problems. That whole thing was just a major catastrophe from people getting sick. Boats broke down. It was like the bad luck city. And then the Forestry Service is unhappy. Of course, then you're getting, PETA and everybody on your butt because we're killing rattlesnakes. Now we're disturbing bats. So we got out of there. And then, of course, the other problem is we can't return because that's property of History Channel Storyline. So now I got to bide my time. I can hang around Fish Creek and film and do stuff, mess around on my own, but I can't go back in there. Now, I'm not saying whether I did or not because I was told I was not allowed to go. If we were caught in there, we'd be fined and put in jail, is what I was told. That not by the production company or History Channel, but by the Forestry Service or something. I don't know. I don't think they could have done it because how would they know we were back there? And I did visit it once with my family to show them, not go up to the cave, but to show them where we were and everything. But
So essentially, that spot has nothing to do with the Lost Dutchman mine or the.
No, because we weren't even looking for the lost. At that point, we were trying to figure out what was going on at Black Cross Butte. Now, the problem there is there's some things at Black Cross Butte we should have been doing, but it was coming down the end of filming, and I told them what we needed to do, and they wanted to go through there first. It was great footage. Now, they got in there, and then the problem became within a year, as when I was talking to the production companies and other people were interested in it, is then I got word that the cross was gone that had been up there. And then once I got word of that, I just spread the word out and said, well, there's no use in even following that up or talking about it, because now it's like nobody knows what's going on or what's happening. Now, this is what I tell people. Talk to Eric DeLeo about the cross and stuff, because here's the problem. I never was up there. The footage, I didn't have any live footage. All that footage is taped. We didn't have a live feed from up in there because we couldn't get it. I had radio transmission to some degree, off and on. And it got spotty at times. Sometimes it was clear, and then sometimes it was bad. So all I had was what I could hear on the radio talking to him. And then he was giving me description of everything. I'd tell him, okay, walk a few feet, and they gave him for some reason they gave him a GoPro, but they gave him a little headlamp and a little hand flashlight. And it was ridiculous because he couldn't see crap up there because it wouldn't penetrate unless he got into a corner or someplace like he did at the end where it's narrowed. So I always tell people, none of us saw any of that except what you saw on TV. That's the only footage we got to really see. I got to see some of the rushes of when he first gets to the top of the ladder and looking around, and it was almost just the worst footage you could ever ask for, because it's literally grainy, it's black. You just see basically a dim light waving around, and you can tell there's a bat going by once in a while. And that's it. And then you hear him saying things like, oh, crap, man, I'm stepping on dead bats.
Oh,
so it took, and the problem is I'm talking to him and trying to get him to work his way around in there. But what people don't understand is that footage, I saw briefly a rush of that, and they showed it to me to show that's unusable. We can't even show him going in very far. But the part where you see him with the cross and all, we saw that afterwards about a month later. Now, someone can tell us about it, but we didn't see it. They brought it in and put it on a laptop and then let us see it. So when we see it, when we're sitting in my truck, that's the first time we ever got to see it. So we get to see that. And we had some still pictures that he took. And we had those. And we're sitting in my truck with that. And we actually filmed that because the problem is when we came out of that whole spot, we were so miserable and in such bad shape from being up there for probably 14, 16 hours, and there was a storm came in on us when we were coming in. We literally drove back into town in our underwear. We were so nasty. I wouldn't let them in my truck. So they had to wait to film that next morning or when we're in the truck. They had to film that later because they couldn't catch us. We literally threw all our clothes in the back of my truck, got in my truck, and left because we were just like, we're done. We can't take this. Plus, half the crew already left by the time we got in. They bailed on us.
Wow.
And I think Woody was gone. Woody had already went back into town.
He had enough.
So they put us in the truck. DeLeo was able to talk to us, but it's just a guy talking to you. So it's like, what did you see? Okay, but we didn't care. I think I can tell you on the way back in, we listened to Prince. I had a CD of Prince in the truck, and I put that on, and we listened to Prince after that. But we got in. We walked back to our rooms with our dirty clothes under our arms and our backpacks, and in our underwear and boots. I walked barefoot to rinse all our clothes off in there because it's just full of guano. Me and DeLeo Max and Frank and Woody were pretty clean. And they weren't happy to be – Frank wasn't happy to be around us because we stunk so bad. We were horrible. So we got in, and then later they said, well, we didn't get any film footage of you guys coming out. We need to wrap this up somehow. So they had to put us in the truck see it. And that was the first time we got to really see the footage. I got to see a little of it, I think, in the production office, but they didn't let me see much. So I'd seen the rush of when he's at the top of the ladder, that stuff. And then they showed that us in the truck because they wanted a natural reaction ball. It was a week later, like, I'm not kidding you. And we're like, really? You know? So literally, and we had to come back a week or two later after that to film the very end of the show because they still wanted reaction from us and kind of a wrap up. So we got in my truck. They brought the laptop in. I'm pretty sure it was Magnuson had it up front. I don't know if it was Magnuson or DeLeo. You'd have to remind me. Which is rare because Frank usually sat up front all the time. That was a big deal of his. And we look at it in the truck. And we all talk about it, and then we had a couple still photos about it. I think, and then we went to see Jack San Felice and showed him a couple of the still pictures we had of it. That was the last we ever saw the pictures of that footage until the show came out, because it wasn't ours. Remember, it's not our rights. We don't own the rights to that. That's the production company and History Channel.
Right.
So people always ask, you didn't get to analyze anything or talk much. DeLeo knows nothing about Jesuits. So he just knows what he thinks, you know, what he's talking about. But he was up in there. So we were like kind of clueless. And we weren't even sure how that was fitting in the show or what they would use it for or how it was. Because you got to also remember, we filmed that and then we go out and then we spent I think we spent 2 days just doing OTFs, which is interviews, out in the desert where I just sit there and talk all day. And they ask me questions and I talk about different things. And then we took a break. We came back. We spent a few days at the Silver King with Jack San Felice where we show him the pictures. And then he's saying, oh, that's a Jesuit. Blah, 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 blah. So we did that part. And then we took off, and then we had to come back to fix some things, which is small stuff. It was like interview stuff where I spent 2 days in California literally going through notebook binders of corrections where maybe I said something and I might have stuttered or I mispronounced a word or did something they wanted to correct. And so you do, you know, I did probably 16 to 20 hours of that, and they probably only used 5 minutes of it, but they want all that redone. So it was just like drawn, you know, at that point you don't care anymore. You say, give me a piece of paper. I'll say whatever you want. Can I go home? Can I have a donut?
Wow.
So when people sometimes talk about some of the stuff, we knew so little and we wanted to get back and we wanted to continue to move forward because we want to know what it is, what's going on. And then the production company is not paying DeLeo and Magnuson. They're not getting checks for what they'd already done. I'm calling them saying, what's up, guys? They're saying, well, we're going to do season 2. We're meeting with History Channel. Okay, we met with History Channel. Be ready to go in 4 to 6 weeks. Tell the guys. The guys are saying, well, I want a check before I even film. I'm calling back and saying, hey, the guys, they want their checks before they film. Well, we'll try to get them a check here soon. Well, they want paid for the whole show. I mean, the show's already aired. It's already doing reruns on History Channel, and they still haven't got their paychecks. And it's like, hey, guys, this isn't working right because Magnuson and DeLeo both lost their jobs, so they need the money. And it's like, come on. And then they're saying, okay, well, you got to wait, you know, and this is going into July, August. And they're saying any week now, a couple of the producers, and then they quit answering the phones on because something happened between them and History and everything, and they start going to work on production of something else. And then I call History Channel, and they said, well, you guys are supposed to be on a hiatus, and then we're going to pick things up later. Well, when? Nobody's talking to me, and I don't know when, and I actually have a job, so I need to know what you guys are planning. Is it we're going to go? Because that's what I always said. Let's film during the winter. Screw this summer stuff. And I said, if that's fine, but I just would like to know, is it over Christmas break? Or we were looking at January, February? What are we looking at? Because you got to also remember, going back, Curse of Oak Island came out. They filmed the first 5 episodes. That aired, and that's what got them to want to do us. So they came up with our idea January, February, after they ran those first 5 episodes, because it was supposed to be Curse of the Superstitions. It was going to be Curse of Oak Island, Curse of the Superstitions, and then they would have Curse maybe of Jesse James Gold. That was their whole plan, to have these series of shows throughout the year like that. And so we're that sister show. So by the time we come around, Oak Island did their second season, which was more like 10, 12 episodes. We ran our first 6, and we're coming around to Oak Island's third season or our next season. And then everything, like, we didn't get canceled. We didn't get not renewed. They got us in standing position.
I know we had a storyboard and what we talked about we were going to film, and just nobody answers the phone anymore. And then you find the production company is sold out to some other company, and you realize, well, who am I contracted to? Well, I'm still contracted to History. And then I finally asked them, I said, look, other people want me to do other stuff. Can I go do that? And they said, yeah, go ahead. And I said, okay, you guys got any plans for me? Not right now. Okay, I'm under contract to you guys. So I started doing other stuff and talking about, stuff. And ever since then, no one's ever gave me a clear indication of what happened between them. And I'm sure it's politics between the companies. But they told us we were greenlit. They told us they had the story in and be ready in 2 to 4 weeks to start season 2. We'd film 4 to 6 episodes, and then we'd go finish our last 4 episodes. We'd probably finish 4 more episodes that fall or winter. And then when I called, History Channel says, well, everything's been readjusted because we had a shake-up and stuff, but we'll get someone to get in touch with you. And then I never heard from anybody. And then, of course, I still have a year. When you sign, your contract runs from the date of the aired of the last episode to the following year. So we couldn't do anything for a year after that last episode aired. We can't talk to anybody. We can do interviews on the show, but we can't do anything other than any other programs. And that was a very weird thing because we just kind of got hung out to dry and nobody was telling us what to do. And then as soon as that all happened, I turned to Frank and I said, you know what, if I don't hear from him in 6 months, let's just start throwing stuff on YouTube and let fans see what we know about what's going on. And we're going to show them we're still doing stuff. We're still out there. It's just History Channel someone's not interested, so who cares?
Yeah, and I know you guys have quite a few episodes. How many episodes are you guys up to at this point on YouTube?
I don't know, 36, 48. I don't know. And it's just let's go out for a day or two and we just try to condense it. So instead of getting 6-7 days in 42 minutes, you might get a single day in 60, 65 minutes or 25 minutes, whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
what we thought was wrong. And we did it not to make fun of history, the aspect of to do something where you sit back and say, those guys are for real. They actually really go out in the mountains. They really do this. Oh, okay. So, and then it goes on History, and they say, okay, we get it. History Channel edits, and, the production company tries to make a story, but you guys really do this. Because we thought the problem was people got a little perception thinking, well, they were just hired to do this. It's like, nah, I put in all this time doing this. I want people to understand there is a reality to this, and nobody should go out there and die based on this TV show. I wanted them to see, like, one YouTube thing, I go out in the mountains by myself, and I fell off the cliff. And I show myself the blood running down my arms and all with my iPhone showing what happened to me. I'm out there, I'm getting overheated, I'm bleeding, I'm all cut up. But I wanted people to see the reality side of it, not the reality show side. But we go out there, shit happens. We find stuff sometimes we don't. But it's very cool, and there's no way we can edit it. It just is what it is, And there's, really no story to it. It's just whatever we're searching for. We try to throw in stuff to explain what we're doing at the time. But we really wanted it to be more of a travel log type, I guess.
Right. And
then COVID hit, and we couldn't really do anything. So the next thing we had to do was we came up with a thing now that people will see predominantly we were doing for a while now. It's called Chasing Legends. And that's purely, Chasing Legends is based on the whole principle of telling stories and different things about the superstitions, talking about things that I've done, trips I've made over the last 40, 45 years. So it's meant to be kind of like educational, instructional about different stuff. So we cover the superstitions. I've read the bark notes on there, and I try to cover that stuff so people have an interest, because I realize on the internet, there's not much information. There's a lot of BS, but there's not really any good hard information. And I wanted people to hear the real stories behind stuff, and, that I've done good research and kind of address some of the questions about different stuff. And it's sprouted up some other kind of other programs that try to do similar things, which is good, because the more the merrier, and the more that's talking about it, the better it is for the, keeping the legend and the folklore and everything alive, certainly. So I don't have a problem. There's no such thing as competition when you're doing it for free and just for pleasure.
And then I worked on stuff for Science Channel and travel and Discovery, and recently history with Beyond Oak Island. And then Robert May, who's an Oscar-winning producer, wanted to come in and did a film on a gentleman named Bob Kesselring, and had me and Bob Shoes and Feldman do a lot of interview footage for it. So we got to work on a film, a documentary film about their hunt, where we're just parts of it. But that was very cool, working with an Oscar-winning producer and understanding how film works differently. So I continued to stay active in all this. And it wasn't necessarily the illusion of ever making it big or a paycheck. It was learning the experience and learning what I didn't get to learn the first time, because I literally went through a very unhappy period of like, what the hell is this? You know, the music industry is 10 times makes more sense than this, because purely everything based on television is on advertising. They could care less if it's dog poop in a pan cooking on an oven. If people will watch it and buy products and advertise, they will put it on the air. So I didn't understand the concept of how television worked, and I learned that. Then I go, okay, I get it now. They don't care if you're a treasure hunter or if it's a ghost hunting show and you're into, if you're into the paranormal. They don't care if you don't like it or think it's fake. They care about the millions and millions of people that know nothing about this that are going to tune in to watch it and buy Taco Bell. And that's where it's all at. So that was difficult for me to understand, is like when I'm watching television, they're basing it on a general population that's just tuning in. They're not changing their life. They're not going to chase the lost husband. They're there to be entertained and then hopefully sit through the commercial that'll sell them something. And once I learned that, I thought, okay, I get it. Television's very different. That's why your most popular show that gets, millions and millions of viewers can get canceled, because, well, the viewing audience is 50 and older. Well, those people aren't influenced by advertising the same as 18 to 35, and they want that 18 to 30. If the 18 to 35 audience isn't there, then your show could be gone, because they don't care about it. They care about the advertising money brought in is what's selling the product.
Yeah, and the sad
not the viewership. The viewership means absolutely nothing.
Right, and the sad part of all that is it makes all the sense in the world. That 18 to 35 demographic, and that's all those young girls that want to see Zach Bagans every week.
But here's the crazier part. The music business at least derived off a product. The product is the artist. Now, he might get screwed. He may, he's getting some publishing, whatever the deal is. There's a product. The product, technically in television, isn't the talent, it's the advertisers that come to the table. And that's hard to wrap your head around, is it doesn't matter what that's why you see cable television has so much QVC and all this other stuff that we can't understand. Why is there so much of that? Because it fills airspace, and there are hundreds of thousands of people that will just sit there with that on. And guess what? There's advertising, and it's advertising its own product, and it just makes some money. And that's all they care. That's what it's based on. I did not understand. That's hard. Me explaining it makes sense. But it's hard when you're just watching your favorite TV shows to understand that's what it is all about. The program you're watching, the production company we worked with, and the crew worked on Ghost Hunters International, Paranormal State. There was another one. They worked on they did Ancient Aliens. They did our Hangar 18. Is that what it was? Hangar 18, Hangar 11, whatever that thing. Not the Megadeth song, but the TV show.
Yeah, I think it was Hangar 11. Hangar 11 is what it was.
Hangar 11. They did that show. They did Ghost Mine. They did another one about some kind of where they were not mountain monsters, but a different one like that was similar. I saw a few episodes. They did a lot of shows like that. And again, I was so confused because I was like, why would you guys even do that show? That was horrible. But again, there's people that will tune in. Like you said, Zach. Man, Zach's on there with his tight shirt. He's got that tiny shirt on, and girls like that. They like that kind of whole. So whoever's like it, there's an audience, 18 to 35 is watching it. They're buying Taco Bell. My God, when you think about how much advertisers spend on commercials and TV, it just blows your mind. And I always wonder, why is there ever such thing as a Coke or Pepsi commercial? Because they literally own the market. What are they really getting out of all their commercials? McDonald's. People either just buy McDonald's or they're not, but they spend so much money And I'm blown away by it because I never really, until I did television, look at the advertising world and realize, man, it sustains the television, not vice versa. Television is just something. The commercials we see, the 18 minutes of commercials every hour we see, is what we're getting. The 42 minutes is to keep us there for the commercials.
Right. So
it's not the way we think about it. And people can say Netflix and other stuff, but that's just someone getting paid and licensed and, subscriptions. It's the same thing the other way.
Right. So life after the TV show, I mean, you mentioned, the trials and tribulations of trying to get the guys paid and nobody calling you back and that type of thing. Now, we're fast forward 6 years later. Where are we? Where do we take the Legend of the Superstition Mountains now? Where are you currently, as we wrap this thing up? We know we have the YouTube channel, Legend of the Superstition Mountains.
No, you want to get cool. Frank and I were working on something that was absolutely mind-blowing. It was kind of psychological. We started getting paranormal people involved, because we thought, even though we think it's more psychological than paranormal, we wanted to get them to come in and see what they were thinking. And we wanted them to be, the lab rats that we got to watch. It involved a lot of stuff that we couldn't make sense of. It was literally the most folklorish, mythological story that was so BS that we thought it can't possibly be true. And we kept finding things that were real about it. And we kept shaking our heads going, this makes no sense. And it involves a 200-foot tunnel with a 125-foot shaft and no dumps anywhere in sight within miles of all this material that's been pulled out of the earth. But it exists. It exists. Who would dig 200-foot tunnel and then dig straight down in 125 feet into bedrock, and it's not a mine? And it was discovered a long time ago, and people have been out there, and everybody's had their stories about it. We went out, started investigating that, along with a lot of other people in that area that were seeing lights in the sky, which we think some of it was military. But there was a lot of things that were mysterious, and we thought there's something out there psychologically affecting people, because it seemed to be one of the predominant areas for murders. There was all kinds of things going on out there. And it's still to this day kind of like shrouded in, we started learning more than we wanted to about people we knew. And COVID hit when we got so far deep into it, and now we're still waiting. We're itching to get out to do all of it, because it involves, and there's people that know the Dutchman that'll be so locked into this, the Burns Ranch stuff, out by the Ward's cabin stuff. There's some mysterious mines that we found on top of that. There's just stuff that we found that makes absolutely no sense. We found one whole vertical pit that goes down 80, 90, 100 feet, and it's got rock-lined walls, like it's a well, but it's not a well. And it makes absolute no sense, because there's no mineralization there whatsoever. So why did someone tunnel straight down and then line the walls with like bricks and rocks neatly and do this? And then, you got the UFO people out there saying stuff, but supposedly someone said they dug up an alien body. Well, why are they believing this stuff? Not that we're going to do much to deal with it, but why are people psychologically bringing all this stuff in? And then part of that lore ran into the people that believed in the Templars. And then on top of the Templar stuff, then it became a story about these stones that can talk. And there were psychics that said the stones have some sort of energy from them, and they're in the area. And I actually possess a number of those stones now. I was given some of them. And this whole mysterious story with that, with a group from Germany and the Holy Grail group, it was the weirdest. At this point, Frank and I will tell you, it's the weirdest story you've ever heard. And every time we try to turn the page and act like this is a joke, the person turns out to be real. They came from Germany and they really believe in this. Well, why do they believe? And then, the whole time I'm thinking this is such a joke until someone hands me this purple and black rock and says this is one of the stones. And I have to look at it. I physically have one of them in my hand. So I have to, now it didn't talk to me. I actually have 3 of them. But it's there. And the psychics say there's some energy emanating from it. Looks like amethyst to me. That's, my take on it. And I'm not going to poo-poo it, but, at the same time, you have people that are believing in this stuff so deeply that's causing drama and psychological issues and causing things to happen. And then we're finding these murders and some of the stuff, the deaths out there were interconnected. And we're trying to, I don't think we'll ever solve the bigger part of it, but you understand what we're doing here is we're looking at the psychology of that area. And is there something in that area that's causing people to kind of act very oddly at times and do things that they shouldn't do for no apparent reason? And it involved, I mean, suddenly Frank and I were standing in the middle. We were the two biggest, I won't say skeptics, but guys that just don't get into this stuff. And we're sitting there listening to people tell us Bigfoot stories, flying saucer stories, alien stories about alien figurines and aliens unburied, Aztecs and Mayans, and the Holy Grail and all this crap. And then some other guy showed up and said he found the Ark of the Covenant. And we're like, what the hell's going on here? Because where did all this come from all of a sudden? So that's a kind of an interesting thing, because every time we went into one of these places to look, we haven't found the Ark of the Covenant, of course, or any of that stuff. But we keep finding a weird part of these stories is true. And we're like, well, who dug the tunnel then? Because there has to be a reason that, one guy just didn't dig this tunnel, and where's the dump from it? And then they said, one of the stories we're told is it had multiple seals. Well, we found the cement from one of the seals laying off to the side, and we found a huge pile of pure sand next to it. So it means they did break a cement caliche seal, and then they dug all this pure sand out and then piled it up on the top. So we're like, well, that's part of the story has to be true, because nobody would haul in, 2 tons of sand for no reason just to make their story real. So it's this weird, you get where I'm going? It's this weird story that it's totally unbelievable. But Frank and I keep finding like weird stuff about it that, well, I guess that part's true. So what else is going to be true? And we haven't been shocked yet. It's nothing's happened more mysterious than some things have disappeared, but we keep sitting there and say, there's nothing spooky about this place, but something weird about it, There's
just an odd feeling.
Something happened there at one time, a long time ago, and we don't know if it's hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, and we don't know what it is. And we know there's burial grounds in the area. We know there's ruins. It's the whole thing, like I said, we're not trying to put anyone on it. We don't know who it could be that was involved in a lot of what was going on, but there was something big happening there. And that became kind of like, oh, we're not doing the Lost Dutchman. We want to know what this is about, because once we stumbled into it when the Fish Creek Bridge or Fish Creek Hill went down, that was just a side project. Let's go check this out, Frank. I've always heard about it. I've been out there a couple times, but why don't you come out? Let's prowl around and see what we think of it. And then that became this of 2 years of us, me and Frank scratching our heads, saying we don't get it. We don't get it at all. And hopefully once we put it together, people are going to get really, I don't know if it would make a great TV show. I don't know if anybody would buy into it because it's so Twilight Zone-ish. Because it's hard to pull together because it's so many people, elements over probably 50, 60-year period. It's hard to make sense of. But it's real, and that's the weirdest part. A lot of the aspects of the story are actually physically there. And we've been trying to understand as, little by little creeping into it. And nobody seems to have a good photographic or video record of it. And that's what we're trying to do is some of the stuff, get it to the public so they see it and say, it's real. They had an archaeologist work on it, but he refuses to speak to anybody anymore about it. Well, why? Because if it's just ruins of some sort or something, but why is he not talking? Because if he thinks it's fake or some BS, then he should be able to say that, right? So we're running into these weird dead ends with people, and I don't know where it'll end up, but hopefully that's what people will see in the next year on that part of the Legends thing. And here, you want to hear the puzzling thing? This is a pit that I know can't be the Lost Dutchman mine, but it's in a remote area of no mineralization. There's no dump in sight, no prospector would ever go up there, and there's a tunnel in the side of the hill that intersects into the pit. Kind of crazy, huh?
Yeah.
There's a peak to the north of it, and it's a north running canyon. It fits like 80% of the clue. I know it's not the Lost Dutchman, but I told Frank one day that the most ridiculous thing in the world is we're not chasing the Dutchman, and this fits the Dutchman more than any place we've ever been. And it's absolutely ludicrous. It's like this weird, crazy place messing with your mind. And we're having a blast doing it, but it's messing with our minds while we're out there. So that's what people besides Chasing Legends eventually have to look forward to. And I'm hoping we get some of it resolved, but this involves more than just 2 or 3 guys. This involves the group we're taking out and being very careful and safety conscious. Because, and people saw, if anybody's interested, go to the last bunch of videos we did, the very last episode, which I think is a new beginning. And when you see that with me with the rope tied in the pit on that, that's the beginning of this story that I just told. And it gets crazy, but we wanted to make sure we did it to show people, one, how dangerous it is, because it's going to collapse. But we wanted to be able to put it out there for people to make their own minds up.
Right.
And we didn't want it to be, we wanted to be something kind of special. And me and Frank have also decided maybe we ride off in the sunset and do our own thing and never do this stuff again. But we wanted to really, and the frightening thing about it was we got a ton of stuff done, and then literally COVID and everything worked against us. Woody almost died last year. It's just everything worked against us to completing it all. So we've got 12 episodes we wanted to do. We got about 5 or 6 done, and we wanted to get the rest of it done, and then everything has been blocking us from getting it done. Which I'm not going to say is a curse or anything. I'm just going to say it just seems typical of anything of like, man, this is really cool. People are going to love this. And then we just can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
We're just stopped.
Yeah. There's definitely going to be a market for that. I personally dig stuff like that. So I think, a lot more people like myself are going to
watch that last YouTube thing.
Okay.
You'll catch where we're heading. And there's a lot that came after that. It's not a Skinwalker Ranch. It's not even like our other show. It ended up taking us down the rabbit hole. And we're 2 guys that don't like to go down the rabbit hole. We usually poo-poo the rabbit hole and kick it shut and say that's stupid. People are full of, we're talking, we think people are on mescaline rather than reality. And we ended up finding ourselves in a position looking at each other in the truck, shrugging our shoulders. Like, okay, those guys are crazy and all that. 10% of that's garbage. They're just making shit up. But there's 90% of this we're finding, we kept finding artifacts and things. We don't understand why this all ties in. We think there's a psychology, something geologically, but there's something that affects certain people out there. And I believe, the guy that thinks he saw, and we do have footage of one of the people talking about the Bigfoot he saw it all. We went out, and lo and behold, when we air that, people are going to find it crazy. We've had a big, huge bear footprint out there. And I'm like, there's no way a Bigfoot would survive in the corn desert out here. It's impossible, man. A human being, naked human being, couldn't survive out here like this. And we're talking about it. We go out there to hear this story about from, 10, 20 years before. And the gentleman who recently passed away, Rick Wynn's telling it. And he tells a story on camera, and we got the story down and stuff, and as we're walking away, we're walking down, and we filmed it. We look down, there's this big, huge footprint in the wash. And nobody knew we were going to go there that day. That was just a last minute, let's take Rick down and have him show us where that Bigfoot story was when we go down here. And it was just a last minute thing to do. And it's just the stupidest thing, because me and Frank just look at each other and go, well, what the heck's that, Why is there this giant footprint? And so when people see that kind of stuff, they're going to kind of go, huh? And you're going to be able to tell from all of us, we're all laughing because we're thinking that's the most ridiculous thing, because that's not what we wanted to see. We wanted to hear the story and then basically say, well, how could that possibly be? And then, of course, like I said, you walk through there, and he says, yeah, they walk, walks down through there and stuff. So we walk down through there. We're trying to get an idea, how tall he thought it was. And then I look down, there's that big footprint. I'm looking at Frank like, what the heck? Really? And then I'm honest enough, I wasn't going to cover it over or ignore it. I said, okay, guys, look at this. What the hell is this about? So, well, there you go. So that's what people have to look forward to hopefully someday.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that's going to be good. I'm really looking forward to that. Please, if you remember, keep me in the loop on that, because I definitely want to spread it and let everybody know about it. And
one of the better parts is that we wanted to find a paranormal group to work with us because of all the stuff that the paranormal group said. We wanted to work side by side with someone and do it on film, where we're working side by side with someone, not trying to make them look bad, but to do something comparative. Like, hey, if your digital recorder catches this, ours better too. And we wanted to do something side by side, kind of dispelling the myth as some of these guys go out and they say, well, we documented this. Well, we'll support you. If something happens, that's cool. But don't give us the old thing of like, well, you guys don't believe, so nothing will happen. You know, let's go out time and time again and see what we can do. And you guys tell us how you feel about something. And then we'll just sit out there doing our normal thing because we're not going to probably feel anything. And we'll go out and we'll protect you from the rattlesnakes. And, you know, we'll see what our evidence comes up side by side. I thought that was a very cool thing for people because I also told the paranormal group, you can air it on your stuff and use it for your stuff. We'll use it for our stuff. And then it also gives everybody a reflective kind of seeing how two groups can work together.
Right.
And we're not trying to debunk you. We're just trying to show you guys are taking this serious and we're taking it serious, and let's see what comes out of it. And so, like I said, that whole thing I think will stir people's imaginations up, but it'll be very cool for them because for the people that are skeptics or non-believers, they'll do that, and I'm kind of fall more that way. And for people that believe in that kind of stuff, it'll give them a chance to see how it works up against with guys like me and Frank, you know?
Yeah, no.
Now, Frank falls that way more than I do, so it'll be interesting with the two of us kind of doing that and see what happens. I mean, I'm open. I'm you know, I want to see the Bigfoot, you know. But now I might shoot at it. So if you want to go out there in a little costume, that might be dangerous. Because I also realize if nobody's ever shot one, 357 Blackhawk will probably bring a Bigfoot down.
Right.
So,
right.
And I'm not going to have, you know, I might be looking at it as going, everybody's going to hate me. You know, half of the world will hate me for shooting it, but the other half of the world will say, great. That's it. That's put to rest. So
perfect.
But no, I'm kidding people. People now are going to think I'm the murderer of the Bigfoot guy.
No, I think you're fine. I think you'll be okay.
Every people kind of stay tuned, catch out the stuff we've done, watch those last, and they'll see what happened with the Fish Creek because we addressed that and what happened in the Degrassi opinion. I think if people will find that interesting, it shows where we kind of went and what we were trying to do, and then other people pitched us ideas. But that's the other problem is people are always pitching us ideas, and I'm not going to do it unless I think it's going to work or mesh well with what we did from the beginning.
Right.
It would either have to be something completely different, and I really like working with Frank and Woody. I'm not saying nothing bad about Magnus and Leo. They live out of state, though. But I really like hanging around with Frank and Woody and stuff. And every time someone pitches me some sort of thing, I mean, it gets so ludicrous and dumb. They threw the Blind Frog Ranch thing at me, and I was like, I don't get it because I want to go and check that stuff out. I don't want to be in it because I don't know why you have me there. And that's a big problem for a lot of production companies is they say, oh, we really want you. We'll pay you well. But I don't want to be on TV in it because I don't know why I'm there.
Right.
You know, you're saying, well, we'll figure it out. Well, no. I don't know why I would go. I'd go as a tourist. And, you know, I want to go out just to hang out one day, you know. I don't want to sit there for 6 weeks and film.
Right.
I have other things to do. And
well,
I'm not that kind of guy, you know. I would have loved to have been at Skinwalker Ranch when they fired them rockets off because that looks so cool.
Right.
See, so that's me. I'm that guy. Bring me out for that day and just let me sit off camera and watch that stuff. That would have been awesome to watch, you know. But you know, I don't know if I'm the guy that you put on TV in that because I'm probably going to seem like a bit of a butthead. I'm just sitting off to the side going, okay, dude. When is something? I mean, it's a dead cow. I've seen about 500 of those in my life.
Right.
Yeah, mutilated. Yeah, you know what? You ever seen coyotes get a hold of a cow before? I mean, I'm going to be very different. I'm going to say, seen that? Oh, yeah, well, guess what? That's the way they chew on them, through the eyes and through the anus. Guess what, guys? That's nothing new. I'm sorry. And that's going to be, everybody's going to be up in arms. Well, that guy's horrible. You know, well, what the hell is he doing? Well, I'm sorry, guys. I've seen lots of dead cows like that.
Yeah, I'm sure you have out there. Well, Wayne, I appreciate you taking the time. We've gone almost 3 hours, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here, and I really want to say thank you for responding to me when I reached out to you about coming on. And I mean, it's been an eye opener for me. We've talked about pretty much everything that I wanted to cover. and, you know, you've really opened my eyes to a lot of things that go on out there and what it must really be like to be a Dutchman and out there looking for the mine and some of the experiences. So again, I want to say thank you for coming on tonight, and let's do this again in the future.
Especially once we're getting the stuff with the episodes and some other projects done. I'd love to talk about those projects, because that would be cool to let people know some stuff they might interest them, and, you know, what are they, because if people love what we're talking about here, it'd be great to kind of like tell them, hey, this stuff's coming up, and maybe we can talk about a little at that point. If those episodes are on YouTube or coming out, we can talk a little about what happened over the last couple of years.
Perfect.
It'd be great to talk about it tonight, but, you know,
yeah,
we're out of time, one. Two,
right.
Nobody's seen it yet, so it'd be cooler for everybody to see it or be able to see it when we talk about it.
Yeah, I know you said you have one episode up that's kind of diving into it, and once you get some more up, let me know, and I'll spread the links and get everybody, and then we'll get you back on here talking about it.
Yeah, and everybody just check out Facebook page, Legend of Superstition Mountains, YouTube, Legend of Superstition Mountains. You'll know when it's us because there's stuff called Chasing Legends. You'll see there's 3 or 4 seasons of other stuff that we've done. It has the original episodes on it. And there's extra stuff like me going down in mines and doing other stupid stuff. And, but, you know, hey, that's part of it, you know, just risking, you know, there's nothing better than going down in a mine that's falling apart without a hard hat and wearing a cowboy hat because I look good.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Not recommended, but no, you know, everybody just, and I appreciate it because I always love talking about this stuff, obviously.
Oh man, so. it's you know, it's actually flown by, and I'm digging it. I've learned a lot, and you know, hopefully the viewers, what am I thinking? Hopefully the listeners that listen to this show weekly will learn a lot and dive into it, and hopefully they'll get on over to your Facebook page and on over to the YouTube page and start watching those videos. So everybody, do yourself a favor, make that happen. Support Wayne, support Frank, support Woody. Let's make this show happen, and we really look forward to seeing what you guys are coming up with this stuff that you're working on right now. So again, Wayne.
And Chaz, one last thing.
Sure.
If we're out this way, hit me up. If it's definitely the cooler weather stuff, we can make a trip, take you out.
Oh, dude, I'd love to. I'd love to.
We love nothing better than to strap a line on someone and drop them down a hole.
I'll do it. I'll do it. I'm game.
Okay.
All right, Wayne, you have a good night, buddy. Thank you for coming on the show, and we'll chat soon.
All right. Thank you, and everybody have a good night.
You too. Take care, Wayne.